Good evening, everyone. It's January 23rd, 2024. We're here for a work session of the City Council. We'll begin with public comment on non-agenda items. Any member of the public wishing to speak to the council on an item that's not on our agenda, please go ahead and come forward in the room. If you're on Zoom, you can just raise your hands. And again, that's non-agenda. Okay, seeing none, I'm going to close public comment. We'll move on to our first work session of the evening, which is revenue and rate review, water and wastewater. Director Webb, hi. Welcome.
Thank you, Honorable Mayor, City Council. Consistent with our goals and objectives in managing a sustainable utility system while offering reasonable cost of service, the city retained the firm Raftalis Financial Consultants to develop our recommended utility rates for 2024. Raftalis is a leader in the industry. Last year, they worked with over 600 different municipalities and utilities. In developing rate recommendations, Raftalis considers a number of factors, including the city's long-range financial plan and cost of service. Todd Cristiano is with us tonight. He's from Raftalis. He's been working with us for many years. If you'll recall, he was here in November 2021 and recommended the 2022 and 2023 rates. He came in after we had kind of a pause after the COVID. You may remember that. The adjustments that were recommended back in 2022 and 2023 were subsequently adopted by City Council, and those 23 rates are still in place today. Tonight, Mr. Cristiano's online, and he's got a presentation for you for the rate recommendations for 2024. And then at your next regular City Council meeting on the 6th, February 6th, I'll be formally bringing a recommendation forward with an amendment to the ordinance. After Todd wraps up, our in-house financial guru, Director Wade, will come up and close things out with us. So, Mr. Mayor, I think Todd's on the line and ready to go.
Thank you, Director Webb. Mr. Cristiano, welcome back. Glad to have you, and the floor is yours.
Excellent. Thanks, Brooks. Mayor, members of council, good evening. It's a pleasure to be back here today. A brief presentation on status of fiscal year 24 financial plan. We've been working pretty closely with staff and updating the models and just getting some new information to set us forth in the next 10 years and getting you up to financial sustainability. So I'll go ahead and share my screen here. Hopefully I hit the right share the first time. Hopefully you can. Excellent. Looks like I'm sharing the right one. So I'll dive right in here. Let's see here. Agenda, talk about the study goals. We have some assumptions I want to bring up, and we'll talk just about the financial projections we have for fiscal year 24. We have some customer bill impacts, and we have a Wyoming typical bill survey. It's not so much Wyoming as it is more of a nationwide look at Class C utilities, which is about the size of what Laramie is, and we'll kind of look at what are some of the statistics there. We have two parts to our scope of work. One is to look at just fiscal year 24 by itself in terms of a revenue adjustment. Typically, we would do a 10-year plan, and we're going to come back and do that, but we wanted to get this fiscal year 24 revenue adjustment in place before we did this more comprehensive look, which will include the financial plan, looking at the cost drivers between the different customer classes, and looking at different rate design components or alternatives. So really, we're focusing on phase one during this presentation. Obviously, we have some goals. We want to maintain the utilities' health, and we want to maintain our reserves. We make sure we're doing the right thing to be able to set us forward for future years of funding capital improvements and operations and maintenance expenses, and be ready to handle any sort of those regulatory requirements that might come down, all while minimizing the impact to customers. So there's a balancing act here of, taking in what the utility needs to maintain operations, repair and replacement, while also minimizing any sort of increases to the customers. So we have a financial plan we look at, and there's a lot of boxes here floating around, and really it's just the process of showing we have to balance a lot of different assumptions and numbers and values, looking at revenues, expenditures, and what kind of plant investment fees we're going to get, any sort of debt issues and grants, and how do we balance all of that to minimize our rate increase. We look at different financial plan alternatives in order to do that. In other words, we're not just willy-nilly coming up with a rate increase without thinking about those things and being prudent in maximizing the use of financing and the resources the utility has through reserves, all while meeting certain policy requirements required by bonds. So the utility, both water and wastewater, has two funds, and we've tracked things this way, an operating fund and a capital fund. And what this allows us to do is find out how much is rate revenues funding operations, daily operations, and funding repair and replacement capital. And on the flip side, how much are plant investment fees, grants, and loans funding those larger capital projects? And to what extent do we need some rate revenue to help fund some of these larger capital projects because we don't have enough plant investment fee revenue coming in, or we don't have certain grants or loans. So a way for us is to kind of look at the different buckets and seeing how things are getting funded. It just provides a little more clarity in terms of when we look at adjusting rates. A couple of assumptions here. We do have some nominal growth. This has not changed since the previous study. We have included inflation in O&M and capital projections, and we have been conservative, but also have recognized that inflation has come up, but we know that it's hopefully not going to stay at that level, so I want to make sure we're a little conservative on that and hope that we see some leveling off, and we've already seen that a little bit, especially with some of my other clients in the Rocky Mountain region, some leveling off of O&M, even some capital. The last rate increase was in January of 2023, so we're just following along with that with this next increase for fiscal year 24. To give some perspective, our beginning balance in the water fund is $35.1 million and $19.5 in the wastewater fund. So we're set up well to help fund some projects, balancing reserves and the use of rate increases, grants, and loans. So let's take a quick look at the water utility. We have a number of large projects going on, and you can see here just a number of repair and replacement, transmission lines, distribution system, got a water master plan, just a number of things going on, a very busy capital plan of $39.1 million. And in talking with staff, if I get this correct, that some of these are kind of carryover projects from prior years, so that's why we're at 39.1. Hopefully, Brooks, I'm saying that correctly. So let's see how we're funding all of these projects. And for fiscal year 24 only, if we look here at this bar, we have capital expenditures of $39.1 million, and we have some transfers to the operating fund to help meet some fund balances, and that's just a one-time transfer to kind of balance the funds. We have $39.1 million in capital improvements. How are we funding that? Well, we've got a host of funds. You can see the different bars there. We've got a change in reserves, meaning we're going to use some cash in the bank to help fund those projects. We also have some grants that we're taking advantage of and some loans. And we have plant investment fees, which plays a very small component of the total funding. But what's great about this graph is showing that we've used a really great mix of loans, grants, and reserves. We're not relying solely on rate revenues to help fund these projects. So we've really gone the extra mile of getting those grants and developing those loans, and those loans are very low interest as well, so fairly low risk. So shows a great balance of using different sources to help fund this large capital improvement program. So that's our capital bucket. Let's take a look at our operating bucket, and this is what rate revenues funds. On the left here, we have all sorts of expenditures. We are going to draw down some reserves. We have a general fund transfer, which occurs each year. We have some routine capital, kind of the smaller capital items, equipment and vehicles and that sort of thing. We do have some payments of debt service for some existing loans that we have on the books. And we have a majority of the expenditures in the operating fund of $5.5 million for operating and maintenance expenses, fairly typical. How are we going to fund all this? Well, you guessed it, a majority of that's coming from rates, and we are taking that transfer from the capital fund to help us out for this 1 year. And we're also using some miscellaneous revenues that we're getting, and things like turn-on, turn-offs, and those just miscellaneous charges, the utility charges to provide additional services. So really, and the revenue from the rate increase is about $100,000 or $80,000. And so that equates to about a 5% revenue adjustment or $80,000. Now, we would say, $9.6 million, 5% of $9.6 million is much more than $80,000. But really, this is not in effect for the full year, just a portion of the year. So that's why we're showing $80,000 of it being in effect when we'll start receiving money from those increased rates when the billings go out, that timing sort of thing. So that brings me to the next slide here of what the rates are going to look like between existing and proposed. You can see it's about a $1.25 increase on a 3/4 inch meter, and that's the majority meter size that residential customers have. And if you look at the single family tiered structure over there on the right, we have a 4-tiered structure. That's not changed, retaining the existing structure. First 3,000 gallons goes from 406 to 426, a change of 20 cents, and then a slight increase in the next tier of next 3,000 gallons, so up to 6,000 gallons. You'll see an additional 30 cents increase on usage between 4 and 6,000 gallons, and of course increases by then. And some increase straight across the board of 5% for multifamily, commercial, all the way through wholesale. So no changes to the structure there, just a 5% across the board, and we'll show you some impacts as a result of that here in a minute. I'll move on to the wastewater utility, and please stop me if there's any questions. Very similar situation. We have a number of large projects, about $23 million worth of projects we need to fund. And we're also going to fund those in different ways, just like the water utility. So we come here, we have our big blue bar of $24.4 million, and we have a transfer to the operating fund as well in the wastewater utility. And it's going to be funded for, again, a host of different sources, loans, grants, and we are taking the transfer from the operating fund. We're kind of switching back and forth there a little bit. And we have some planned investment fees and changes in reserves. So again, we're using a good mix of different sources to help fund those projects rather than relying solely on rate revenues. If we had relied solely on rate revenues, we would have had required a much larger revenue adjustment in this one year. And that does present a challenge if we raise rates to cash finance capital projects all at once. The next year, we may not have as many capital projects, but now we're generating much more revenue than we would need because of this large one-time increase. So by issuing loans, getting grants, and planned investment fees and using change in reserves, we can really limit or help minimize the revenue adjustment and that impact to customers. On the operating fund side, again, we have this multicolored bar, general fund transfers. We have routine capital, we have debt service, O&M expense, and that's funded primarily through rate revenues. We have a slight revenue adjustment there of 5%, some miscellaneous revenues, and we're also drawing down reserves to help buy down our revenue adjustment. At the end of the day, 5% increase, and we get about $50,000 from that increase being effective April 1st. So very similar situation to water. This 5% allows us to maintain our operations and help maintain reserves and to be a continuing going concern, a financially healthy utility into the future. We do have some more customer classes on the wastewater side than we do on water, but you can see we assess the base charge based on meter size, just like we do in water. You can see there's an increase between $13.66 for a 3/4 inch meter. That's going to go to $14.34, about 60 cent change there. And we have the restaurants, taverns, so on and so forth. All the way down there at the bottom is the residential class, $4.77. That's going to go to $5.01. So about a 25 cent, almost a 25 cent increase in the rates there. Again, 5% across the board, just like in water. So I'll pause right there and see if there's any questions before I move on to the rate comparison.
Does anyone have any questions at this point? Yeah, Councillor Shumway, please.
Okay, great.
Todd, I have one question.
Go ahead.
You talked about having a transfer from the general fund. My understanding is that the enterprise funds, which is water and wastewater, is not a source of revenue for the city of Laramie. We neither make money nor is it something to where it's something that should come out of the general fund. Now, you said when you use the general fund money, is that something where it's taken from general funds to cover costs and then returned to the general fund? Because my understanding was it's not supposed to draw from the general fund as a way to, keep the accounts healthy. Am I wrong? Or is it coming from the general fund as well as grants and as also rates?
What I'm showing here, and I believe I need the general fund transfer, that's a transfer out from the utility to the general fund. I may have misspoke earlier. That's money's going from the wastewater utility to
Director Wade is willing to field this as well. Oh, City Manager, great, please.
Thank you, Mayor and Councilmember Shumway. The general fund carries the burden for utility billing and other associated, what you would call overhead costs. And so the general fund is repaid from the enterprise fund for the execution of those services, billing and things of that nature.
Just to follow up, just so I understand, the end result is that it's not something that we have to budget as a source, a line item from general fund. It's just a matter of the money's collected through utilities and then it's paid for these different things. But we're not pulling money out of our operating or general fund, which the city has. It's just a transfer from the ratepayers, correct?
Mayor, Councilmember Shumway, that's correct. If you'd like, Jennifer can talk about the fund accounting and the reason for the transfer. Jennifer, you want to address that?
Welcome, Director Wade. Thank you.
Good evening, Honorable Mayor, City Councilors. So we have, I will just say that Todd, of course, is working with our 10-year financial plan. And so what we've been calling this transfer in the past couple of years is the support services transfer. And so the utility operations actually reimburse for costs the general fund incurs for services that they consume. An example of that would be human resources, administrative services, some of those operations. If you recall, engineering is actually in the general fund, and of course they do much work on enterprise fund projects. And so that's actually the transfer that Todd is referring to in his presentation, and there's nothing unusual going on here. Yeah.
Thank you, Director. Anything else, Councilor? Okay. Any other council members with questions at this point? Can I get a quick explainer as to why we're doing a sort of like a single fiscal year instead of the 10-year? I might have missed that, but I was just curious about why 1 year rather than in the sort of full 10 that was discussed as well. Director Wade? Sure, thank you.
Honorable Mayor, I actually made note of that too. It's not correct to say that we're not doing a 10-year plan, because staff did prepare the full 10-year financial plan when we recommended the 5% overall revenue increase in each fund. I believe what Todd is referring to, and I'd ask him to clarify this, is that we're not doing a full rate study, which is what we would do normally for a biennium.
Okay, thank you. Does that ring true?
Sorry for the confusion. That was the phase 1 and phase 2 comment I had early on about for the phase 1, we're looking just at the fiscal year 24, with phase 2 going into the full 10-year full-on rate study, which we would normally do.
Great. Thank you. Councilors, other questions before we move on? Yeah, Councilor Pierce, please.
So just to clarify, so they will be, after this, they will be coming back to do a full-on rate study of including stormwater? No? Okay.
Okay. All right. Any other questions, councilors? Okay. Mr. Cristiano, back to you.
Excellent. So we finally get to the rate comparison, and one of the challenges with doing peer utility comparisons is there's just a lot of differences. Every utility is unique, and everyone has their unique challenges, everything from how they get their water, where they purchase it, and that sort of thing. So when we look at surveys, we need to keep a couple of things in mind. One is where the source of supply comes from. If they have a water rights portfolio, especially in the Rocky Mountain region, what's that water rights portfolio look like? As an example, the city of Longmont has very, very old water rights. It's a lot cheaper for them than a lot of those growing communities which are having to buy new water rights. So they have a huge, much larger cost structure for that. Asset management, how well they've been addressing their system. Sometimes you see utilities, they want to show the lowest rates. That doesn't necessarily mean it's a good thing. It might mean they're deferring maintenance. And history of rate increases. Was the last rate increase 20 years ago or 10? The history of rate increases is very important. Has it been keeping up with inflation? The service area is the density and the demographics, the topography of how you might need to pump water sources. We're working with the City of Aspen, and they have a lot of different pumping zones, and the cost varies significantly. Water treatment costs, depending on where you are, you might have different sources of water that require different sort of contaminant treatment. Credit ratings, that's another thing. If depending on how leveraged you are, what your credit rating is, it can be the difference between a 200 basis point interest rate on certain debt items. And capital funding, are you cash financing all of your capital projects versus bond financing? And if you're bond financing, you're kind of stretching or amortizing those costs over 20 years, which you can keep rate increases lower, but over time it will cost you more money because of interest. So all those sorts of things just make for a big difference between when comparing utilities, and just something to consider that if there are some big swings between different utilities, there could be a host of one of these things or more that could be causing that major difference. But to look at the typical bill increase for water here, on average water use 6,000 gallons, we're looking to go from $52.35 to $54.95, about a $2.50, 60 cent increase, 5% effective April 1st. But let's put that in some context in terms of what are other utilities, how does Laramie fall within just the greater scheme of water utilities in the West. So Raftellus maintains a database, and this chart here looks like measles. There's all these different utilities that we have gotten survey data, rate data, and put together a database of typical bills for any sort of consumption. So what we did is we pulled off the western region. We looked at Class C utilities and did a comparison on water bills and compared Laramie with all of the other areas, all the other utilities within kind of the Rocky Mountain West region. And it's a collection of 500 utilities, and we're Group C, less than 20 million gallons per day. So we filtered on that as well. And just to give some context, the City of Cheyenne and Casper are in the B group, so they're slightly larger. So we look at our chart here. We have two sets of bars here. The first one is 6,000 gallons and 12,000 gallons. On the far left there, the 1684 is the light blue. And out of the survey of about 51 or 50 utilities, the lowest bill was 1684, and I believe that was coming from LA, surprisingly. They don't have a service charge. So really low usage is sold at a very low cost as compared to the higher usages. The highest usage was another utility, I believe in California. It wasn't Malibu, but it was something like that. But like I said, we have this cross-sectional mix across the western region of all the states. But where the average is, which is the gold bar, that's $57.91 for 6,000 gallons and $94.03 for 12,000 gallons. And Laramie fits pretty close in there with $52.35 and $90.39. So we are, Laramie's kind of right at the average on both of those. And of course, we don't know whether these other utilities are having a rate increase coming up this year, whether they've instituted one, just hasn't gone into effect. So there's a number of factors that could change the positioning here, but it does show that you've got competitive rates, all else being equal with other utilities. I'll just highlight those there. So we can go back and look at additional utilities. If there's utilities you want to look at with the state of Wyoming, we can certainly do that as well. When we come back to you with our full-on rate study, looking at the full 10 years, we can certainly do that. But this concludes the presentation. Again, 5% increases both on water and wastewater. And this kind of concludes our phase 1 component, but our phase 2 will be that whole comprehensive look at the 10-year study and looking at the cost of service and the rate design for the different types of customer classes, and ensure that you've got the sustainable financials over the next 10 years to make sure that you can fund those capital projects and maintain operations as well.
Thank you, Mr. Cristiano. Council members, any questions? I have a couple. I think the first question is, when we have the full study on the rates, could we see a similar graph to what you just provided, or maybe the graph's not as important, I suppose, as the data piece, but for sort of like similar size communities and I think maybe similarly rural would be helpful. I think adding, sort of like adding LA, it's interesting, I think, and it was good to see. And it's nice to know we are sort of like in the average or near average. But it's a little bit apples to oranges, right? And so to see those, I think what would be more interesting to me is other communities kind of comparably sized in sort of like generally rural areas. And I think that would be, so I don't know if that's possible. I'd sure appreciate it if it were.
No, absolutely, and we can certainly do that. We can work with staff in looking at some of those communities that I guess are similar in size, operations, and structure, and do a comparison there and find out some additional information on the utilities of what makes it similar to Laramie and that sort of thing. Provide some better context for you. We can certainly do that.
Okay, great. And the other question is for staff, but I'm not sure who. When you look at that list of sort of like the project list is pretty intense. We all know, council's well aware, there's a lot going on in this part of the city. Is that something we should be considering as sort of the norm going forward, that sort of like workload of capital projects specifically? Is that the general idea? And then the question would be, does this fund increase support that moving forward as those debt services add on and things like that?
Mayor, yes and yes is the answer.
I'll take it.
Yeah.
Brevity is appreciated.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that 10-year plan we're looking at is our 10-year capital plan. And then when we come to you here in just a couple months with our recommended budget, all those rates that's all being taken into consideration for the rates as we move forward. When it comes to you, I think in the
Have to keep in the back of our mind because they could have invested adding in great infrastructure like we are here or not, or maybe too excessive. So when we are talking with our constituents, we need to make sure that they understand that we basically have a plan, and it's really hard to compare apples to apples or communities to communities because we just don't know how good or bad their system is underneath the surface. That infrastructure is so important to keep in mind.
Yeah,
That's it.
No, I appreciate that, Councilor Pierce. I think that's wise. And it made me think also, sort of this councils for, decades have been quite concerned with our drinking water, whether that be sort of aquifer related or the rest of our water portfolio. And I think we've taken pains as a city, the residents have, to ensure that water ends up at their house clean, right? So I think you're right. It is a tough comparison. So I appreciate you pointing that out. Any other council members with questions? Director, sorry, Councilor Shumway, and then come to you, Director.
Well, I'll be real quick. I know the city is on a attempt to replace all of our infrastructure at least every 50 years because I think that's the potential life of our poly or plastic pipe that we have right now. However, I still think that we have a variety of different systems still in the ground. We have, I think, some wood. I think we have some cast iron. I think we also have some clay pipes that are underground. I know they're being replaced, but I think it's interesting that we'd still have some old wood, I think on First Street and places like that, which hardly anyone knows that we have things that old, but I know they've been replacing them as quick as we can, and I think we're finally up to a point now where we're on top of it. There was a time when we were having 150 breaks a year, and those numbers are way down since we've taken on the attempt to get up to where we're in control of what we're doing. So anyway, I just thought it's interesting that, not all the infrastructure's changed every 50 years. Some of it's changed more often, but I think the schedule is like every 50 years, if I'm not wrong.
Yeah, Mayor, Council, we still have a lot of steel pipe at the ground. I'm told there's no wood left.
Good.
So, but one of the things the city engineer reminded me is because of our soil conditions here, it breaks down that steel pipe much quicker than a lot of other communities, which requires, of course, more work there. The other thing I wanted to do, if I could real quick, is just address Councilor Pierce's question regarding stormwater. It was rude of me to just sit back there and shake my head. Sorry about that. So if you recall, we're working with a separate consultant on the stormwater feasibility study, and we have a work session scheduled for the last Tuesday next month. I think it's the 27th. We'll be back with them to talk about that. So that currently the stormwater's general funded, and the utilities, the water and wastewater, and the separate enterprise fund.
Thank you, Director Webb. Please, Councilor Pierce, yeah.
Do we know now if it could move to a enterprise fund or no? Stormwater. Or I can wait, we can have that discussion later.
Yeah, let's keep things compartmentalized. It's a whole other, yeah. Folks will probably be interested in that conversation, so we'll keep them in their lanes. Councilor
Okay.
Brody?
Oh, I was hoping Director Webb could stay up. I was just wondering, I think that the number of breaks per year or whatever our metric is would be nice to publicize. So
Sure.
I know it's decreased, so can you give us a ballpark? Or should we wait to have a paper report and not put you on the spot?
Yeah. Mayor, Councilor, I don't know off the top of my head, but we can definitely get something together and shoot it out to y'all. It's dramatically decreased over the last 20 years for sure.
Thank you. Councilors, other questions or comments before we go to the public? Okay. If there's any member of the public that wishes to comment on this work session, go ahead and come forward or raise your hands on Zoom. Okay, seeing none, we will close that public comment period. Last chance, council. Okay. Thank you all. And Todd, thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Have a good evening.
You too. We'll close that work session. Councilors, we're going to move on to our next work session, which is possible speed limit reductions. City Manager.
Good evening, council. I think the clerk will pull up the presentation. So we had a quick introduction for you tonight before you accept public input on this item. The question for tonight is, should Laramie's speed limits be lowered? And staff have brought this work session forward on behalf of your Traffic Safety Commission. Public Works and the police chief will be helping me out tonight. We're going to take a quick look back at our last comprehensive traffic study. Then we'll talk about what the Traffic Commission is recommending, and then we'll look at options for moving forward. So as we look back at the last comprehensive traffic study in 2014 and 15, I wanted to address this only because it seemed that there was some maybe inaccurate information floating around. The inaccuracy being that at that time the city should have moved to the 25-mile-per-hour speed limit based on the results of the study. There was an initial discussion at the time of the traffic speed study of moving to 25 miles an hour, and for reasons related to compliance, the cost of enforcement, and also the cost of signage. The ultimate determination, once that worked its way through the process and ended up here at council, was that the community determined that we would continue with a 30-mile-per-hour speed limit and sort of accept that. In fact, the slide at the bottom there is a slide out of your city council archives from July 28th of 2015, where you can see the recommendation there for local streets to remain at 30 miles an hour. The only the only area of the city that was accepted as moving to lower than 30 miles an hour was that streets adjacent to the University of Wyoming, as we all well know. So that's kind of a look back, but I will say that in 2014-15, there was a pretty robust discussion about whether we should move to 25 miles per hour on local streets, which would be residential, if you want to think of it that way. And a lot of reasons that at the time that didn't make good sense. Many of those issues remain today and are things you will likely flesh through as you talk about this here now in 2024. So So let's take a look at current conditions and data, and I'm going to ask Chief Brown to come up and walk through this data for you. He compiled this data from LPD data and also the state database through the Wyoming Department of Transportation. He'll take a look at crash history in the community and some heat maps of where that's occurring.
Thank you, City Manager. Chief, welcome.
Let me pull this up. Mayor, council members, thank you for the opportunity to speak tonight. So all this data was pulled from our LPD in-house data and then confirmed with YDOT. So what we did is we pulled traffic collisions from 2018 to 2022, and then we split them up into 3 separate categories: vehicle versus pedestrians, vehicle versus bicyclists, and then all traffic collisions. I will add a caveat that these are only reported traffic collisions. So if somebody was struck and did not report the collision or did not rise to the level of an injury where there would be a 911 response or emergency services response, it wouldn't be on this chart. So what we have here is total collisions during that time period were for vehicles versus pedestrians were 19 collisions. One of those were fatal, and that was an individual who was walking on the I-80 freeway, but it was within Laramie jurisdiction, so that was handled by Highway Patrol. So we kind of took that out of some of the equations, so really you're looking at 18 traffic collisions if you take that out of the equation. The next category that we're looking at is vehicle versus bicyclists. Of those, we had 20 accidents and 0 fatalities in those accidents. And looking at the data on the bicyclists, it looks like 9 bicyclists were cited for being at fault, 5 vehicle drivers were cited for being at fault, and the other ones were undetermined. For the vehicle versus pedestrians, we had 5 auto drivers also cited for being at fault and 10 pedestrians being at fault, and then the other 4 or 3 minus the fatal were undetermined. And then overall traffic collisions during that time period, approximately 2,053 traffic collisions, and 232 of those involve a speed-related incident, typically speeding too fast, unable to make a turn, maneuver a corner, and of those 232, that's approximately 46 a year during that time frame. Go to the next slide. Can I do that? Yeah. So we compiled some heat maps. The first map that we're showing you is actually data that we pulled. So when we get a typical speeding complaint where someone's speeding through a traffic or a neighborhood, we'll put one of our trailers out there. It's actually one of the smaller trailers, so you can't tell that it's out there, so we can collect the data. We do have bigger trailers where you'll see flashing signs saying slow down. So we try to do both to kind of get the data first, and then if it shows that people are speeding, like you'll see over here on Pierce, and that was during the Curtis Street construction. We were getting a lot of complaints about speeding down that street. So we put it out there to see if it was actually occurring. And as you can see, the average speed was over 30 miles per hour, but still pretty reasonable at 33.1 miles per hour, considering most of those vehicles were coming out off the interstate. But the majority of the dots that you see are within the 30 mile an hour speed limit. I will note that most of those trailers when they were put out, or the boxes when they were put out, it is major arteries in the city, because that's usually where we'll typically get most of the complaints. But there's a few in residential neighborhoods also. Okay. So this is the heat map of the data that I mentioned earlier, and this is the total traffic collision in our area. And what you're seeing is the majority of our collisions occurred on our major thoroughfares on Grand and 3rd Street. Really, Grand and 3rd, you can see, is lit up like a Christmas tree there. So, but once again, that is over the time period of 2018 through 2022. The next one was highlighted. It was those, I believe, the bicycle injury or traffic collisions. There were 20 of them. And this is the area, you can see a substantial highlight in the area of the college. The college data is not a part of this. We didn't include the UW data because they're already approximately 20 miles an hour in most of their jurisdiction. And that would be impacted by the change in most areas, by the change to 25 mile an hour speed limit. And then for the same time period, you have auto pedestrian accidents. And you're looking at that number that I mentioned earlier, 19 auto pedestrian accidents. And then again, you see Third and Grand is a pretty major area. And we've been working with planning and engineering to give them all this data. So that if there's anything that sticks out, any specific reasons, like say, of those, that area, you have 4 crashes and 4 of those are stop sign violations. Well, maybe we need more notification in that area, or maybe we need to repair a stop sign or relocate a stop sign. So those are other things that we're looking at as a staff team. And then this is just both auto-ped and then bicyclist collision, auto-ped and bicyclist. And this one's all 3, auto-ped, bicyclist, and then also where our radars were. And just based on my presentation, is there any questions from council?
Council members, any questions for the chief? Councilor Doherty.
We recently got an email wondering about scooter crashes. Are they listed with bicycles? Or
Through you, Mayor, I don't believe they are. I believe YDOT has a separate category for scooter crashes, but I can look into that and get a number on that. I can tell you just based on my experience in the previous, year and 2 months that I've been here, I don't recall one scooter accident going out over the radio or us responding to one, but I would assume that there's probably a few that I missed.
Thank you, Councilor. Thanks, Chief. Councilor Newman.
Chief, will you tell the stats on bike versus vehicle, who was at fault, and pedestrian versus vehicle, who was at fault?
Through you, Mayor, Councilmember Newman, for auto versus pedestrian, 5 vehicle drivers were cited, 10 pedestrians were cited or noted at fault, and 5 were undetermined. And typically that's where you would have one person saying one thing and another person saying another thing, no independent witness that can corroborate either party. And then for auto versus bicyclist, 5 drivers of the vehicles were cited, 9 bicyclists were cited or noted at fault, and I believe we had 20 total there. That would give us 6 undetermined.
Thank you.
Thanks, Councilor. Any other councilors for the chief? Okay. Thank you, Chief.
Thank you.
The city manager.
Okay, so continuing on, Traffic Safety Commission met on October 12th, and they had formed a speed limit subcommittee that took a look at this. The subcommittee came forward with a presentation, which was included in your packet for this meeting and published online. At that meeting, they also held a public hearing. They received 8 public comments, 4 in person, 3 Zoom chat, 1 written, and roughly 6 of those comments were in favor of some type of change, with some of the commenters focusing on, local streets would be a good place to lower the speed limit, and other folks saying, no, we should consider lowering it everywhere. So there was a variety of in favor opinions, or shades of in favor opinions, and then 2 were not in favor of changing the miles per hour limits within the city. So the full Traffic Safety Commission did move to forward the subcommittee's recommendation to the City Council, and that was approved. That recommendation is articulated here explicitly in quotations that Laramie should implement a default citywide 25 mile per hour speed limit with posted exceptions. So that's verbatim from your committee. And feel free to jump in if you have any questions.
Great.
So moving forward, staff committee sat down with that recommendation to bring forward a couple of options for you to flesh out tonight. The first is that you could change the speed limit citywide. There is a process, so one might think that the city council has some sort of unilateral control over what the speed limits in the city of Laramie are, but that is not the case under Wyoming state statutes. Wyoming statutes require that if you were to change speed limits in the city, that you must complete a traffic engineering speed study. And so that would be what we had done in 2014-15. Staff are estimating the cost of a citywide study to be about $350,000 to $500,000. I know that's a wide spread of 150 either way. It's just because we haven't done a comprehensive study of that sort recently, and we know that pricing has changed and the market has changed a lot in the
City
last few
Manager, can I
years.
ask a quick question about
Please.
that? I know that's not yesterday, but that feels recent, like the city hasn't dramatically changed since 2015. Would we really need a new survey we have a survey with the results, right? That the council passed on it last time, but the survey is still.
So we did talk about that, and it's the opinion of Public Works and Engineering that if we were going to do a citywide change, we're going to need to do a citywide study, that data is 10 years old. There are some other, shades of options that we're going to work through here, okay?
Thank you.
You're welcome, but very good question, Mayor, and one we asked ourselves as well. So we would need to complete the traffic engineering study, and then as part of that, we would ask them to help us with a signage placement plan according to the MUTCD, or the Manual on Uniform Traffic Control Devices, because state statute requires that we place those signs and we adhere to the state's manual, and that is MUTCD. So based on what the MUTCD says, we would need to place speed limit signs at every point of change. So for instance, if you're moving from a 25-mile-an-hour zone into a 30, or if you're moving from a 30 down into a 25, there needs to be a sign placed at each of those locations. Again, this is something that staff really looked at, trying to figure out, well, could we place the sign at the city limits that says speed limit is 25 miles per hour unless otherwise posted? You see those around communities. That is an option, but according to the letter of the MUTCD, we would still need to place those signs at every point of change to ensure that we have an enforceable mile per hour limit. So we know that there will be a number of signs that we will need to place if we were to change the speeds citywide, and the material and labor cost for that is to be determined. Brooks did work up an average cost for us on materials and labor. We think it'd be about $405 per installation. So there's a rough ballpark. So that's sort of option one. We could do a citywide speed limit change, and this is a process for how we would accomplish that. If we wanted to look at local streets only, or residential streets only, same thing. We would need to do a traffic engineering study. You can see the cost here, and this gets, I think, to your point, Mayor, is a little bit less. We think maybe $350,000 to $400,000, simply because we wouldn't be studying every city street. We'd be looking only at residentials. But of course, residentials are the majority of the streets within the city of Laramie. So maybe some cost savings there, but still fairly substantial. And then again, we would need a sign placement plan, and we would need to figure out how many signs we need and assess that cost as we move forward. Third option was you could limit the study to problem areas, and this would take us back to the heat maps that Chief Brown just presented. We could more narrowly focus a traffic study to look at hot spots. Chief Brown mentioned 3rd and Grand, look at those kinds of areas, although we recognize those are also wide-out rights-of-way, so we have some limited control there. We don't know exactly what the cost of sort of problem area studies would be. It would definitely be cheaper, and some of those staff can probably conduct in-house, as we do right now when we have requests for modification to traffic control or traffic patterns. Engineering staff already will do sort of site-specific, if you will, studies, traffic studies. And then again, the placement of signs, again, to be determined, some signs there. So in general, we're offering up 5 points for conversation tonight. The first three: A, a citywide change; B, looking at local streets only; C, looking at areas of known conflict or problem areas; D, of course, you can do nothing; and undoubtedly E, there are other options for how you might like to move forward. With that, that's kind of all we had for you this evening, just to give you some idea of what those options might look like, and look forward to your conversation. Public Works and Engineering are here to answer any questions that you might have. I did want to just conclude by leaving you with what we think a traffic study timeline might look like if we do a citywide traffic study, or if we do a local or residential road study. It'd probably take about a year to finish this, so we could put it in the budget, bring it forward for you to approve in the spring when I bring my budget recommendation to you. Then with that money becoming available in July, we could issue a request for proposal, have staff and public review in late fall, winter, and then be back about spring of next year with finalized data and a signage plan and a ordinance drafted if in fact you would like to change speed limits based on that data.
Thank you, City Manager. And council members, if you have any questions about this part, I was curious if I know there are many members of the Traffic Safety Commission. I assume probably somebody from the commission or the subcommittee would like to speak to us as well up front. So I don't know if you have a question now or you want to hold it, but if it's now, have at it.
Thank you. And this is more towards city staff or our police chief. Do we have data, or could we get data on speeding tickets 30 and above? And the reason I'm thinking about that is, do we have the incidents, the safety, the considerations, are the bulk of the tickets coming in at 42 miles an hour and they're in a 30? Are they spread rather evenly? I don't know what that says or what it could say, but I'm just kind of curious if we would know, and if it may help other council members in kind of thinking about this. I mean, if we have a lot of people being cited at 33 miles an hour, so they're going 3 miles over the speed limit, plus attached to that, they're not driving safe, there's, for conditions or whatever, so there's other things, that's perhaps is telling, I don't know, but if all the tickets are at, you're going 45 and a 30, that's telling too, at least to me. It's like, I mean, I'd just be curious if we could get some of that. Not right now, but, somewhere soon.
Thank you, Councilor.
Mayor, we can certainly try to work with PD to pull that kind of data. What I would remind you, though, and I think the engineers would tell you, is when we do the citywide traffic study, that is something that's looked at. So we're gathering traffic counts, we're also gathering speed data. And if you think back to that first slide where I talked about our 2014-15 citywide traffic study, the reason that we ultimately ended up as, a city, right, up to the level of the council not changing speed limits is that speed data said that the majority of pedestrians, and Eric probably knows it by heart, he can quote the numbers better, but it showed that a majority of vehicles on local or residential streets were traveling below the speed limit already. And that was one of the points of conversation at that time. Now, whether that condition persists today, I don't know, but I offer that only through you, Mayor, to Councilor Pierce, because yes, we can look at citation data, but I'm going to argue, as we probably all will agree, that the presence of an officer will change your behavior, right? Where the traffic and speed study maybe is capturing more reliable data about what speed people are actually traveling. I'm not saying we won't get what you're asking for, but I'm just saying bear in mind that that may not be the best set of data to look at. So with that, I just want to close by maybe asking Eric if he'd like to come up and flesh out a little bit more what the 14-15 study said on local street speed, because I don't want to misstate that. And also thank our Traffic Safety Commission members for starting this conversation in our community. And I've noted those folks here. We've had some change in membership, so some folks are leaving and some people are coming in new, but in general, I think these are the folks who've brought this conversation up for us this evening, so appreciation to them.
Thank you, City Manager. And before the City Engineer comes up, I see Councilor Somerville and Councilor Richardson both have questions on Zoom. So Councilor Somerville first. And City Clerk, Councilor Richardson is just in the participants list, or the attendees list.
Thank you, Mayor. Just to pile on the questions, so I'm wondering if we have data on the crashes involving bicycles, same type of citation data. Was the bicyclist at fault? or the motorist at fault? And then in the alternative to just targeting speed, I'd be interested in all of these hot spots. So on that last pretty map, the notation of two things. One is, are there crosswalks and appropriate signage in place at all of these hot spots that have been noted? And are there any large entities in those areas that are also affecting that outside of 3rd and Grand, but right at McHugh and I guess it would be, Curtis Street, McHugh and Curtis. I know that intersection very well. There's no crosswalk there, and there's a ton of traffic as well as pedestrians in and out of there. And it looks like a bunch of these are also around larger institutions. So in the alternative of doing a $500,000 traffic study, I wonder if we couldn't also have an alternative where we looked at the addition of some other different types of measures. So I wonder if we had those two pieces of information available or if we could get that. Thank you, Mayor.
Through you, Mayor. Councilmember Somerville, with respect to, I'm going to restate what the chief stated, and if I misstate, he's going to correct me, but with respect to the pedestrian and auto crashes, in 10 of those cases, the pedestrian was cited and determined to be at fault. In 5 of those, the automobile driver was. With respect to bicyclists and auto crashes, in 9 of those cases, the bicyclist was cited as at fault, and in 5 of them, the vehicle driver was cited as at fault. I don't believe the chief has the reason, but yeah, so that's that again. And then to your last point, I think that is what we were trying to articulate in option 2, is looking at hotspots or problem areas where we know we have a history of conflict between vehicles and pedestrians or vehicles and bicyclists, looking at that for engineering design and to determine if there is something that we can do in terms of the hardscape or the signage of that area to improve conditions for both drivers, pedestrians, and bicyclists, or also maybe doing site-specific traffic studies in those locations to determine, maybe we have a speeding problem, things like that. So that is sort of an option that I think staff are open to if it's where the council would like to go.
Thank you, City Manager. Any follow-up, Councilor Somerville?
Yeah, Mayor, just a clarification. I guess, City Manager, could you clarify for me, so the second option, I took that as being primarily still a speed study in those areas. Could we bifurcate the two? So can we not do the speed study, but just initially focus on the crosswalk or no crosswalk or signage or that type of stuff without having to do the full speed study?
I think the answer
that is a first step.
Yeah, through you, Mayor. Councilor Somerville, the answer to your question is yes, and I think that's what street and engineering are doing. They're looking at these areas where we've had a lot of issues and determine, as you mentioned, say McHugh and Curtis, if there is no crosswalk there, is it permissible to place one there? And is it within the city's control to place one if it's warranted, or do we have to work with YDOT in those areas? So yes, and that's what I refer to as kind of the engineering design of the intersection or the roadway. That hardscape is definitely something that we can look at. There's a lot of solutions for these issues, including the speed of the motorists and those conditions that people encounter.
And City Manager, I was just wondering if a quick analysis of those hotspots would show that there's, in 80% of these areas, there's no crosswalks or there's no signage, or if there was something easy to pick out. So I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Councilor. Councilor Richardson?
She's on mute.
She is not muted, but we still can't hear you, Micah. Nothing. No. Can just see your mouth moving, but can't hear you.
Mayor, if Councilor Richardson could email her question to the clerk or I, we could bring it forward.
Councilor, if you're able to email, you're welcome to email and we can get it answered just the same. Or you can text me. I can't hear you still. And Counselor Somerville, now I can't hear you. So maybe this is on our end, but who knows? So I'm going to go to Counselor Newman because he has a question in the room while things level out there.
Mayor, I'll wait until after public comment.
Oh, okay. Counselor Pierce, please.
Yeah, so about a week ago, maybe a little more, I was reading an article about public art on the street for and around to help with traffic calming. And specifically, they were putting it near daycares and where little folks were at. And according to this really small bit of information that I read, it basically said that really helps to remind folks that there is a daycare in the area. And it had nothing to do with bulb outs or fancy flashing lights to remind drivers and stuff. It was that very specific public art on the street. I know that seems a little, I was like, this is interesting, right? Because, I'm not really artsy crafts, it's just not my thing. But I think we should somehow include that if we go forward with this, to really look at how that could possibly help as well, especially in more of our neighborhoods that may have like home daycares, or on our busier streets where there are daycares, or maybe it doesn't have to have a daycare focus. It could have another focus that we think is really important, like bicycles or whatever it happens to be. But I think we need to include that information in our study if we go forward with that.
Thank you, Counselor. And Counselors on Zoom, we think maybe it's on our end because apparently you can hear each other. So stay tuned, still working on that. Thank you for your detective work, Counselor Somerville. Counselor Shumway, did you have a question or comment?
Thank you, Your Honor. Looking at the information that was given to us, it looked like many of the hot spots were on state highways. And I guess I have two questions. First of all, did the state participate in the 2015 study? And the other is, do they determine the speed limits on streets such as Grand, Snowy Range, and 3rd?
Thank you, Counselor. Director Webb has an answer for you. Two answers for you, I suspect.
Yeah, Mayor. Excuse me, Councilor Shumway. I don't believe YDOT necessarily participated in the 2014 study, other than providing some of their speed data that they acquire and we get from them to use. As far as the state highways, yeah, the district engineer and district superintendent are responsible for those speed limits and setting those speed limits. I will say, talking about 3rd and Grand, in a couple of years here, YDOT's coming through and going to redo 3rd Street when we get our water line done. And they're going to make some improvements through there that we know about. There's some different areas where there's bulb outs. They're talking about, the timing, just changing some timing of the signals and maybe some speed limit changes through the downtown area there, where we saw that big red on the heat map. So I think there's some future work there that's going to help with some of that. But yeah, those state highways are primarily YDOT, and we can ask and give our recommendation, but ultimately it's up to the district engineer and district superintendent.
Thank you, Director Webb. Councilor Richardson, if you would like to try again, we'll just see if you're there. Otherwise, I'm going to go to the city engineer and just invite him to walk through the 2015 study. Going to the city engineer. Sorry, Counselor.
I wonder if Councilor Somerville can.
She texted that she could. We're coming to you. Thank you.
Hello, Mayor, members of council. So I believe the question was of what they found on the local streets in the 2015 study. And when we do speed studies, it's not the only thing that you look at, but a lot of times you use the 85th percentile. So 85% of those vehicles are driving. And what they did find, it was quite a variety of speeds that we did see on local, but on average, they were looking at, most people were driving 25 miles an hour on the local streets.
Great. Thank you. And maybe I'll turn it over. If there's anyone from the Traffic Commission that would like to speak to the council, you'd sure be welcome to. Certainly no pressure, but
I have comments.
We'll have-
as a citizen. I'm no longer on the Traffic Safety Committee.
oh, great. We can get you a microphone, but if you'd like to we'll come to public comments in a minute, I suppose.
He's still on the Traffic Committee.
But yeah, Nancy, I'd invite you up. If you'd like to add anything, please do. You took the time to be here.
I took the thing. Honorable Mayor, Council.
Please.
Just what I've seen tonight, 85th percentile is the rule used to set the speed limit. They build the road, see what 85% of the people think is safe and 15% of the people think they should go faster, and then they set the speed limit. So if everybody's doing 25, the speed limit should be 25. Every other time we've set a speed limit by the 85th percentile, that's the rules we've gone by. So I've looked at things like 42% of other communities in the state have lowered their speed limits. I had a nice conversation with Lieutenant Smith. He is the officer in charge of patrol, which are the people that enforce, as compared to detectives or other things. And yes, there would be, at the beginning, there would be a crunch. But within 4 years, everybody that has come new to town, the students, would know that it's 25. 42% of them come from towns where it's 20 or 25. At some point, I sent you a listing of all the town ordinances and everything like that, so that's there. One of the things I know in your what do you call it, your goals and objectives, you had a meeting just real fresh on that. And boy, that was fun to listen to. I love that stuff. Was a healthier community, a better community. And reducing the speed of cars does a couple of things. It makes your streets more friendly for the walkers and bikers, and every walker and biker that you see out there, or scooter, or e-biker, or what other micromobility you have out there means there's fewer cars on the street. If there's fewer cars on the street, I'm reading right now an engineering study the city had done that said there's a lot of intersections, and it's all on Harney Street, and people have to wait 60 seconds to get through that intersection because there's so much traffic. Well, if we reduce the speed limit a little bit and we can encourage more people to get out of their cars and make those small trips without the car, the wait time for those people that do drive will improve. And when you think the difference between doing 30 to go from here to here as compared to doing 25, it's not like you're here, now you're doing 30, and now you're at your destination. No, you're here, you're speeding up, you get up to 30, you got to slow down because there's a dog, then you speed up, and then you go down. It's a limit. It's not the speed you're going to be traveling the whole time. So the amount of change in the time it takes you to travel is not that great. It's a matter of a few seconds per trip. Years ago, I was a firefighter in the military. I was too old to be pulling hose and putting the wet stuff on the rest. I ran the truck. I did the fire prevention. I taught the little kids the fire prevention stuff. I had to find my niche with that. Fire departments found that going full Lyrans and sights didn't get you there that much faster than going on the QT, and it saved a lot of crashes with fire trucks because people, oh, there's a fire truck, what do I do, what do I do? Instead, just move with traffic, keep the traffic slow, and things, you get there just as fast. So those are the points that I can come up. If you have any questions on anything, you can all call me back again. I have been cranking on this for now, 6-9 months? So
Thank you, Nancy.
Yeah,
Yeah, I
thank
sure
you.
appreciate that, and thank you
Want me to
for
sign?
your work on the Traffic Commission. Is there anyone else? Sure.
Would it be possible for me to make some comments as a member of the Traffic Safety Commission?
Yeah, of course it would. Yeah, please, you just have to come forward, or we can bring you a microphone if you prefer.
I'm pretty mobile,
Okay.
actually.
And then Mr. Milliken will come to you next.
A lot less risk averse on mountain bike trails than I am on city streets, so. A couple of points that were in our presentation from the subcommittee.
Will you just give us your name real fast?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Just
I'm
for the
Melanie
record.
Arnett.
Thank you.
I live in Laramie, and I
You're great.
just finished my term on the Laramie Traffic Safety Commission.
Thank you.
And a couple of the points that weren't brought up in the presentation that was just provided to you, that were in the presentation that the subcommittee, the Traffic Safety Subcommittee presented to at our meeting where there were public comments, were that the study that keeps being referred to, I'm not sure where the idea that was decided by the community. That was a city staff decision. There were 3 people that attended that meeting, which one of them is Lee Knox, who's a friend of mine. And when I read that, I called him and said, "Do you recall this meeting?" And he said, "Yeah, it was really weird. I heard about it because I just had some different problem." And they said, "If you want to comment on this, you should go to this meeting that's today at 1 o'clock. At the fire station." It's like a Thursday. So that's not community input. So it was a city staff decision. And then a couple of other things that were in our report that didn't get presented here is that in the 321 streets, if you look at that report, you'll see public comments on a whiteboard in that report, in a photo from that, and say, what does the community want? We want lower speed limits. And in the Laramie pedestrian study from some time in the last 10 years, one of the public comments that's also noted in the report, that's a city report, or at least, I'm not sure how you get the Laramie traffic pedestrian or the pedestrian safety survey, but that's in the city documents, and one of the things that was requested was lower speed limits. So those are the only things that, as a Traffic Safety Commission person, that I wanted to make sure you're aware of.
Thank you, I sure appreciate that. Mr. Milliken, come on forward. Just give us your name, and the floor is yours.
Hello, my name is Eric Milliken. I'm a member of the Traffic Commission. However, I was unable to participate in the subcommittee. I was not available at the time. But I'm a professional traffic operations engineer. I work for OLTIG. I actually was the one who prepared the Harney Street corridor study for the city recently. And some of the data that the Laramie Police Division presented echoed some of the data we saw in our study. Part of our study, we did collect speed data for the entire corridor, 3rd Street to 30th Street. And what we found was between 3rd Street and 15th Street, just like the Laramie police data showed, everybody was driving, most people were driving under the speed limit, 30 miles an hour. But then once we got east, between 15th and 30th, people started driving over the speed limit. You guys know why. Between 3rd and 15th, lots of on-street parking, lots of accesses, lots of intersections, lots of bicycle and pedestrian usage. And then once you get past 15th Street, once you get past the university, it's very empty, it's very open, lots of room, vehicles feel more comfortable. And so I think one thing that gets lost in the discussion of setting speed limits is drivers will drive the speed that they are most comfortable with. And so that's why we see lower speeds between 3rd and 15th, and that's why we see higher speeds between 15th and 30th. So just lowering the speed limit is not going to help. There needs to be the cost estimates that the engineers gave you may have been low because those may not even lower the speeds of vehicles. You may need a more comprehensive traffic calming plan for the whole city in order to lower speeds to your desired 25 miles an hour. If you want higher pedestrian safety, higher bicycle safety in the area, some better options would be more traffic calming options, reducing lane widths on the roadway, increasing bicycle lane width size. Bulb outs are great. Bulb outs shorten the distance between sidewalks where people can walk. The less time people are in the roadway, the better. But yeah, there's there's a lot more that needs to be done if you want to lower the speed limit to 25 miles an hour other than just putting up some signs. That's something you should definitely consider if you're considering lowering the speed limits.
Thank you, Mr. Milliken. I appreciate that. Any other Traffic Commission members have any comments here? Okay. Council members, is that all of the presentation from the staff end as well? We all squared away there? Okay. Council members, any questions? Well, actually, before that, Councilor Richardson, sorry, I almost didn't ask your questions after you went through all the trouble to send them to me. So whoever would like to field this one, this is from Councilor Richardson. And just as maybe a point of process here, should we, if they aren't able to speak, this feels clumsy, should we pause and see if we can reset? Is there any benefit to that? I don't know the internal workings of Zoom and a reasonable enough way to make that choice.
Yeah, Mayor, it's hard to tell exactly what happened here. It sounds as though maybe there was an internet support issue. It's strange that we could hear them and then all of a sudden we couldn't. So,
right. Agreed.
Councilor Somerville's tried to rejoin. And if you want to speak one more time, Councilor Somerville, just so we can confirm whether we're still experiencing the same issue.
Mayor, City Clerk, can you hear me?
Small miracle, there you are. How about you, Councilor Richardson?
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Good job, tech team. Okay, Councilor Richardson, I'm going to turn it over to you for your questions. You'll do a much better job at them than I will.
Okay, well, I would give me that much credit, but thank you. So my first question was, I understand that we're kind of looking at potentially a partial traffic study, a full-blown study, all of those sorts of things. One of my questions is it possible to use the 2014 study, and again, I may not fully understand the extent of traffic studies, but is it possible to use the 2014 study where it still is applicable, and then just update in those areas where things have changed, where the streets, the structures, those sorts of things have changed? I don't know if that makes sense or not. I've got another question, but I can wait until that one's answered, perhaps.
Thank you, Councilor Richardson. City Engineer? City Manager, whoever.
I was just going to say, I'm going to let the engineer address the shelf life of that data.
Great, thank you. City Engineer, please.
Honorable Mayor, members, through you. So with that type of study, usually we only expect a life expectancy of that study of about 3 to 5 years. Reasons for that is when you have changes throughout the community. If you think about what's changed in Laramie in the last 10 years, we have the new Harney Street corridor. Schools have moved, they've shifted. We've added new subdivisions. We've added new signals. So there's just been a lot of changes to our community and how the traffic flows, how it moves, that we just wouldn't feel comfortable just fully taking that study. We could possibly look at using some data, but we would probably want to collect data in other areas and make sure, depending on how council, if they want to, how that study looks and how it's set up, of where we focus that data being collected.
Okay, thank you. Councilor Richardson?
So my second question is, if we did decide to move forward with this and we changed the signage, an idea that may not fly, but I thought I'd throw it out there anyway. Instead of spending the $406 per sign, is it possible, at least in the interim, maybe it's like a slow rollout of new standard signs, but thinking about like even a sticker, like the license plate stickers that you cannot get off for the life of you, could there be something like that that is placed over those signs temporarily until we are able to like slowly phase those into the newer signs?
Mayor, through you, Councilor, we can certainly look at other options. I'm not aware of any, but something that if we decide we're going to make the change, then we can look at the cost and alternatives.
Okay. Thank you, City Manager. Councilor Richardson, any other questions or comments?
I have comments, but I can wait until comment time.
Sounds great. Any other council members with questions? Councilor Shumway and then Councilor Doherty.
this, should we come to a $400,000 study, this has not been budgeted for 23, 24, so we'd probably have to talk about it in our budget discussion to implement for the 24-25 budget.
Thank you, Councilor Shumway. Councilor Doherty?
I was wondering, the rule about changes, the signage has to be at every place where there's a change. Was that in effect when 9th became a 20 mile an hour? I mean, I'm just trying to picture if there's, I know there's a lot of signs missing in this town, especially right around there. So does every time you turn off of 9th onto one of the east-west streets, are they all, does it say 30 again? I mean, do we have that in place now? Because it doesn't seem like we do, but maybe. Or was that not a rule back then, or what?
Mayor, Councilmember O'Doherty, the MUTCD was recently updated, and Eric brought that to my attention as we were preparing for this work session, and a new edition adopted by the state. The city engineer did go back, however, and look to see if the requirement that a sign be placed at every point of change had changed, and he said that it had not. And Eric, if there's anything you want to add, please. So I could think to the specific example, I don't know, but I would assume that 9th Street, where the university has their 20s, there should be a sign placed everywhere where the change occurs.
I think maybe the question is not should, it's is there a sign? City manager, and I don't mean to sort of dive into the semantics of it, but the question isn't whether or not we should have a sign, it's did we follow this guideline when that change was made?
Yeah, both Mayor, members of council, through you. I'm not going to say that every place along 9th has it. I haven't evaluated, but we have gone out and looked at it, and the bulk of it does have the changes assigned from 20 to 30 at that location. And kind of just to go into the other question, it was stated that back when the old MUTCD did state, if you actually read in the 2014 study, it also states with the cost of signing when it was talking about the 25 miles an hour, it says to lower the speed limit to 25 on local streets would require the city to post a speed limit sign at each location where a motorist would leave a 30 mile an hour zone and enter a 25 mile an hour zone. And it kind of continues on a little bit more with that. But so that was one of the reasons for that in the study. And as you look at the new MUTCD as well, it basically states anytime you have a change in speed, you need to post a sign.
Thanks, City Engineer. Councilor Doherty, please.
So if I understand that, then on 9th Street, when it goes to, if you're going from Clark onto 9th, there would have to be a 20 mile an hour sign heading south and a 20 mile an hour sign heading north. So then it seems like there's a 20 mile an hour sign every block, and I don't perceive that as being the case. It seems like it's just at the beginning of the zone on each end. So if you're coming in from one of those side street, you know, one of the other streets like Flint, Bradley, it seems like we'd need a 5 20 mile an hour zone signs on each side of the street on 9th. And do we have that?
There are quite a few out there through you, Mayor.
Thanks.
Thank you. Councilor Newman and then Councilor Pierce.
Councilor Pierce, is yours on kind of the same topic?
It is.
Thank you, Councilor Newman. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I just drove 9th today going north from Ivinson. And while in the university area, it was very clear it was 20. I believe, I don't remember exactly where the sign is placed when it says you can go up to 30. I actually think in front of the Science Initiative building, it's 30, if I'm not mistaken. And the sign might be that early.
Science building.
Is it that early, you think?
Council, I'm gonna jump in here and say, you know, I'm gonna offer this. 9th Street, particularly from Lewis down to Harney, is probably not a very good example for us to be discussing, and I'll tell you why. Because the university, as we know, has made notable changes there. There has been construction of the STEM building between 9th and Lewis and 9th and Bradley. The university, as part of those efforts, has removed signs. I can't tell you what the condition there is now. There was construction all along 9th Street in front of the classroom building. Who knows, right? But the intention of staff at the time those signs were placed was to honor and adhere to the MUTCD. So I can't tell you what's there now. Certainly, I'm guessing Eric's going to go take a look at it. But I also want to mention that there's been a lot of changes, and the work in our rights of way and adjacent to it is not always under our control. So it could be in an imperfect condition currently, but that is not the condition that we would recommend that you move forward to install signs across the city. If we make a change like this, we would want to adhere to the MUTCD. And now I'm going to have to go drive it tomorrow and look too.
I think we'll all see each other there.
Right.
Councillor Newman, go ahead with your question.
15th is probably going to be just as bad.
Yeah, maybe worse right now.
Yeah.
Councillor Newman, and then to Councillor Gabriel.
I have two questions, two different, probably staff will have to answer it. And if you can't now, I totally understand. Do we have an idea of how many speed limit signs in Laramie that say 30 miles per hour right now? Do we have an idea of what that count would be? Like I said, they probably can't be answered. I was just...
Mayor, we have a sign technician in the street section of Public Works, and I'm sure that's information that we could try to lay our hands on in terms of an inventory of signage that we have and maintain. But I'm pretty sure that Brooks does not have it readily accessible in his hard drive.
And I figured.
It strikes me as the kind of question a sign technician is like, I hope they never ask me.
Right.
And my basis of the question was just a cost analysis of what we've spent on, a rough estimate. My second question is for the chief. Chief, and you might not know this either, if I'm doing a 35 and a 30 and I get a speeding ticket, what's that cost me?
More than you make on city council.
Through you, Mayor, Councilmember Newman, I believe it's $85, but I'd have to confirm that there hasn't been an increase since I got here. And to your question, Councilmember Paris, so sometimes there's a basic speed violation. So sometimes our speed citation is not necessarily 100% accurate because it's an increased scale. So if our officers pull somebody over and hypothetically, maybe they're doing 40 instead of charging them, or instead of charging them with a section that would increase with 5 miles over this or 10 miles over the speed limit in that case, they would do basic speed violation. So our data might have it as speeding, and a basic speed violation would be approximately anywhere from 0 to 5 mile or 1 to 5 mile over the speed limit. So our data wouldn't be 100% accurate, if that makes sense. So a lot of times our officers will try to bring that amount down because it's a sizable fine as it increases the speeds.
Thank you, Chief. Thank you, Councillor. All good? Okay, Councillor Gabriel.
Thanks, Mayor. I was just going to get in on that conversation concerning 9th Street, because I remember when that was 20 and 9th and Clark, I contacted Brooks in like the next couple of days because there was no signage from the 20 once you hit past Clark Street on 9th. And, you know, within a couple of days, Brooks had a 30 mile per hour speed limit sign in that transition from 20 to 30. So I think it works pretty well there, but I'm kind of, my audio is not very good tonight. So I just thought maybe I'd add that point on that discussion concerning 9th Street. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Gabriel. Councillors, other questions? I have a few. City Engineer, what's the I don't know what of, I don't know where this would be found in sort of like the literature that sort of dictates the sideboards of your career, but I think, I guess the question is, what is the stopping distance change between 30 and 25?
Oh, interesting.
Hello, Mayor, members of council. So I would have to, I don't know that directly off the top of my head. That would be found using the, what we call the Green Book.
Okay.
And everything, the manual on.
I was going to say the Green Book, but I thought it might sound.
Yeah, but really what it's based on is it's physics, and it's how long it takes. We have basic parameters that you enter in, and I don't have the table directly in front of me to pull up, but it would lower it some, but not significantly, but I don't know directly off the top of my head.
Okay, and you can stick around. I have a couple more for you. I think the reason for that question, and I sure would like that answer. You can just email it. It would be fine, I suppose. But this conversation, I think, is largely centered around bicycles and pedestrian safety, and I think that's meaningful. But to Mr. Milliken's point, there's other ways that we can get to that, and I think we should do those things. I also support this change because I think it has other sort of rippling effects that have come before the council in the past, and the primary one that I'm thinking about is we had a long conversation about sight triangles that almost ran us all into the ground. And I would be interested to know what the change there would be. And so I assume, because you don't have the chart for the speed limit, or that the stopping distance change, that you don't also have the sort of like the impact on parking, or sort of that safety. But I would be interested in that as well. And in particular, you know, I live sort of by Beidel, and so I drive the intersection of 17th and Sheridan. I have to make a left turn onto Sheridan often. And because of the parking situation, it's the moment that I was like, I don't know, he might have been right about the side triangles. Imagine that. But I see accidents there often enough. Or like sort of near misses. And then in fact, today, Chief, one of your officers was walking into the school for, I assume, a presentation or something, and I started to go and had to slam on the brakes, and he was right there. And I was like, oh, great, I'm going to get a ticket before this whole thing. But you know, long story short, it's really quite hard to see, and I would be interested to know what that change would be. Because I think we might see some other, obviously you're going to use 30 miles an hour as your benchmark for those calculations, so I think there would be some changes there. And so, you know, I think for that reason alone, I would support this change. But so I said stay there because I was going to ask you questions, but I sort of talked in a circle and didn't ask you a question, other than can you please send me those things before we get back to it?
Honorable Mayor, we can definitely get through that. And I will state, you know, sometimes when we are doing the sight triangles in an area that we are knowing lower speeds or something like that, we might take that into account when we are doing those sight triangles and use engineering judgment on that. But it will decrease, and we can easily get you an exhibit to show kind of hypothetically what the effect would be on that.
Okay, yeah, and I think in the situation that we all discussed previously, you know, it left like one or two, if we sort of like played the side triangles out to the fullest extent of the Green Book, it left like a parking spot or two on that block. And obviously if that took effect citywide, people would be down here with pitchforks, right? And that's why it hasn't taken effect citywide. You know, I think that might be a meaningful change in that effect. And then maybe the other question I would have is there any conversation happening at a staff level about traffic calming measures that could also be meaningful in these situations? And if so, what are those, and when can the council expect to hear about them?
Your Honorable Mayor, I guess, could you clarify that? Would that be like on all our projects, or what, or like areas where we see the hot spots, or
yeah,
what are your?
That's a good question, because it wouldn't, I don't think it would be based on projects, right? Because largely the projects aren't on this, people don't ride their bikes on Sheridan, they don't ride their bike on Grand Avenue or 3rd Street, right? Like those aren't safe places to ride your bike, no matter what the speed limit is, they just aren't safe. You are going to choose Ivinson Street or Garfield if you need to go this way and you're sort of right here, right? You're not going to ride down Grand. Our projects are going to be on Grand and 3rd Street and on our heavier use streets. So I don't think it's attached to projects. I think it is about how do we use, or do we have any plans for traffic calming on the streets that are being used or should be used more readily for this sort of transportation? Because I think we'll see an increase. I think we should see an increase if we're going to certainly meet our carbon goals. We should see an increase in this kind of transportation.
Just to answer that, we don't have necessarily direct plans right now, but, some of the projects are, we've talked about Willett Street in the past, and as part of that project was going to include some traffic calming. So if we know of an issue that's going on, we'll take a look at that as we're moving forward with it. If an issue is brought to our attention, we'll try to get that fixed. Whether that, and that kind of depends on what we have available for funding. Sometimes traffic calming can be cheap and like paint. When I say cheap,
Right.
it's not as expensive, but there is a cost associated with it versus like a complete road reconstruction. So, as we move forward with projects, with any complaints we see, we do try to take that into account and try to improve that as we kind of move forward with that. But I'd have to go back and look through specifics of our projects or anything kind of going on of like complaints we're looking at or things like that to answer that more directly.
Okay, yeah, thank you. And, I think one thing I've been thinking about is, to me, this conversation so far has largely been centered around sort of like folks just wanting a safe way to use their bike to travel around. And this is a pretty easy way to do that citywide. I think, and this is on me as much as anyone, but we have not done a good job, and I know the reasons. I know we haven't had paint. It's like a very practical reason, but there's not a lot of signage for bicycles other than on these main thoroughfares, and I think. For what I said earlier, that maybe isn't like a suitable solution because nobody's going to ride down the, some folks will use 9th Street through campus. They're going to be on the shared use path. And then they might ride for a few blocks, but they're not going to necessarily choose 9th Street if they have other options to ride their bike. And, and I think for that reason, when we were looking at the heat maps of accidents, that was on my mind because we're seeing, the 20 crashes, but everyone I know that rides a bike in town has had a near miss, at least one, where they thought, I'm going to get hit right now by a car sort of rolling through a stop sign or something like that. And it's not, they didn't get hit, right? Like largely the data bears out they did not get hit. But there's a lot of near misses, and I just wonder if cars were traveling slower. That's going to drop dramatically, right? Like if we can find a way to slow cars. So whether that's a speed limit change and some traffic calming, I think it's probably that. But if cars are moving slower, there'll be less accidents, and when there are accidents, they're less serious. That just seems practical, right? Like, I don't know. Maybe the data seems contradictory in some of this presentation to that, but that seems logical. And so, I'm certainly favorable to this, but it's costly. For sure, and I was surprised by the traffic study costs, not the cost of the study, but the need for the study. Schools have moved, streets have moved, but the people driving them haven't. There's still, 200 more people or 2,000 more people or whatever the census said. But, cars have moved from here to there, but that doesn't change the sort of like how many cars are on the road necessarily. So I can see the value, but I can also see that what we have informs a decision too. So, Vice Mayor.
Well, Mr. Mayor, I did a quick search, and at 25 miles an hour with an attentive driver and dry conditions, so attentive driver would be a 2.5-second response time. It's 121 feet. At 30 miles per hour, it's 153. At 35 miles per hour, it's 187. And at 40 miles per hour, it's 224. So the difference between 25 and 30 is a 32-foot stop. The difference between 30 and 35 is a 65 feet stop.
Well, thank you, Vice Mayor.
Welcome.
Was that out of the green book?
No, it was off the internet, and I hope it was right.
That was Dr. Google.
Dr. Google, so.
Appreciate it just the same.
It's probably in the ballpark.
Yeah.
And City Engineer, would you say, I'm not going to ask you to say those are right. You told me you don't know if those are right already, but does that bear out? Do those sound wild to you or within the range? Just, I don't want to leave here thinking something that's not true.
Mayor, I probably will need to look into that before. I'm not doubting it necessarily, but just don't know directly off the top of my head. I should know, but I unfortunately I don't dive into that book as much as I used to.
Yeah, no problem at all.
The source was the
Omni calculator.
Like an academic, cite your sources, right? Okay, any other council members with questions, comments? Councilor Pierce?
You know, I am very supportive of basically what Eric had mentioned, and I loved your comment of related to things we can do associated with traffic calming and slowing down and in making things far more visible to the pedestrian and to the folks on a bicycle and those driving cars, and to kind of lessen that collision or accident thing. And I think we've been, as a community, doing that to the best we can in the areas that we've put in new streets, right? And you know, and I think maybe if we just extend some of that activity to different intersections and different areas around town that we may not be constructing, but we could do paint or some other things. I think from my perspective, that really needs to be the first goal. I also really appreciate Nancy's comment about if we're already going 25, why aren't we 25, right? Because, you know, that 85%, and that was so clever. That was very good. You just kind of stuck that in there, and you know, so thank you for that. I mean, that was also very telling. And, you know, I was on council in 14 and 15 when we had this conversation, and how I recall things, I think folks were very concerned and very passionate about it. And Joe, Joe was on council? Yeah, maybe Andy, I don't know, but yeah, and it was a very impassioned conversation, and I feel like it was more than one conversation, although I could remember wrong, but I think the conclusion why we didn't, you know, lower it at that time, and please help me, you know, kind of remember some of this, it was cost. It was always about the cost, and in a community like Laramie that we have an extremely tight budget, and I'm not saying it's an excuse, but they are things that we really have to think about. So that kind of that stepped approach of those hot spots, those different areas, you know, that we can pay attention to first, I am absolutely supportive of whatever we can do in those areas where we already know we have issues, and then really think long and hard on the budgeting process and the cost associated with some of these things, because, you know, it's a competing thing. You know, you fill the pothole, you know, there's only so much money. So, and that's the unfortunate piece that we have to deal with every day.
Thank you, Councilor. Councilor Somerville?
Thank you, Mayor. Can you guys hear us still?
Yes.
All right. So to Councilor Pierce's point, that's what I was going to suggest, is more of a stepwise approach. I'm a little concerned about the cost of the study, and I think that the local streets certainly need some attention, but I think we can zero in on those hot spots. You know, you can read plenty of research, and in fact, I think it was former Councilor Vicki Henry that gave me a book. Well, I can't remember the title of it, but it really spelled out the need to consider speed limit changes, but more importantly, to consider landscape changes. Because if you have an open road and you put a 15-mile-an-hour speed limit on it, they're just not going to obey it, because they're going to drive the speed that they feel is comfortable and safe most of the time. And so we really need to focus in on that. And I don't know if we've done a really good job about that. We probably need to have some more conversations about sight triangles around the city as well in some of these areas, and make sure that we're making sure all that is good to go. But I also had a comment on the logistics, and to Councilor Pierce's point, I was on council back then for that conversation. It was very passionate. And one of the things that I do have a logistical concern about is starting this process and expending potentially up to $500,000. Hopefully it's less than that, but up to $500,000. And starting this process and then having the council change over significantly in January. I would be more comfortable pushing not start the process until 25, because then you could have a 2-year block where the council was going to remain the council for those 2 years, and you could be relatively certain that an investment of that size was warranted and would be adopted by the city council and would move forward. So it would also be my recommendation that we consider the timing of when to start this conversation if we want to go down that road, and potentially push that off until January. But I do think that there's a lot of ways to address. I think a crosswalk over on McHugh and Curtis and some signage would go a long ways. Even with the new bridge over here, we're still seeing pedestrians and bicyclists and even scooters that are not necessarily navigating in a safe manner. And I think we should also keep in mind that there are some significant changes still going on at the university, and that traffic pattern is probably going to change with the construction of the dorms being complete. That's a pretty massive, impactful project in an area that's pretty accident prone around the Tree area. So again, we might want to let that get finished before we expend that much money on a traffic study. So thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Richardson.
Thank you. I just, let me put my hand down. We'll echo some of what's been said. I think, I think asking the questions of why are we considering this and what are the obstacles, I think foremost is safety, and starting simply by looking at these hot spots and making changes there and seeing if improvements can be made based on these changes, like, Somerville has said, crosswalks, those sorts of things are great. I also think about the change, the speed and the increase in safety that has, like that stopping distance, all of those things. And while we heard from the data that oftentimes it is the bicyclist or the pedestrian who's at fault, and we probably need some education around, safe moving, sort of thing, that doesn't take away from the fact that there are these accidents. And if slowing that speed decreases some of the risk or the injury, that seems like a positive to me. So I guess I would like to continue thinking about the reduction to speed, but also not necessarily one way or the other. Can we find out what the cost would be for something on a smaller scale? Can we start with something on main thoroughfares, biking and walking thoroughfares that the Traffic Safety Commission feels like would, if we had to choose, what would those places look like? I don't want to take it completely off the table, but I think, thinking about this in a multifaceted way to address the issue.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Newman.
So I was going to keep my comments, but everybody else is saying them, so I might as well too. $500,000 is a lot of money for traffic, and maybe it's 350, maybe it's 400, maybe it's 500. We don't really know, right? I have a hard time. Here's my dilemma. I don't support this. Here's why. $500,000 is a lot of money that we could use to fix some potholes. If we're already averaging 25 miles an hour, why would I want to spend city money that we could allocate to something else to change all these signs if we're already doing it, right? So I'm having a real hard time just with changing the speed limit. Now, if we talk about some of the other stuff, I'm in the conversation for sure then, right? If, crosswalks or, I kind of like the art idea, actually. Think, and I've always said this, think outside of the box. How can we change this? Because the reason why I asked about the speed limit, how much my ticket would be, I would just pay the ticket, to be honest. Now, if there was something that would slow, like the art or, something on the side of the road that's art even, that's a little bit different than just saying, okay, I can only go 25 now. I'm still going to do 30 and I'll pay my $85. And I feel like a lot of people that I have talked to is going to do it. They're going to do the same thing. So we have to think outside the box on what else we can do to make it safer, because obviously safety is an issue and we need to think about that. But just lowering the speed limit to me isn't gonna achieve what it sounds like everybody on council wants to achieve. So we really do need to think outside the box before we kind of spend some of this money that we could allocate to something else, if that makes sense.
It does. Thank you, Councilor Newman. Sure. Vice Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So looking at the at fault, the autos are at fault a third of the time, and either the pedestrian or biker was at fault 2/3 of the time. So then to me, I start to look at, well, they may have been at fault because they violated the traffic sign or something, but is it non-observance, or are there issues with our pathways, which we know there are issues with the pathways for biking and for walking? And the mayor has pointed out that there are some roads, such as Sheridan. If I'm on my bike, then I am not going to go down Sheridan. I'm not going to go down Grand. And I wonder about, our goal is to the safety, not only of cars, but our pedestrians and our bikers and our neighborhoods, et cetera. Maybe we need to look at those designated pathways, and that if we're going to spend $500,000, possibly it would be better spent, rather than controlling all traffic, looking at, do we have pathway problems, which we kind of suspect strongly that we do, and can we enhance those pathways so that we have safe corridors for bikers and walkers, pedestrians, to get from one side to the other of town? So this is just a thought.
Thank you, Vice Mayor.
Mine goes along with that. Chief Brown, is there any way that you can break down for us what these pedestrians and bicyclists were actually ticketed for? Because I think that would bring a lot of information to the conversation.
Chief, please.
Through you, Mayor, I do have a list here, and this is from YDOT. So I'll give you some of the samples, or a sampling of what I have. For the cyclist, improper crossing, failure to yield the right-of-way, improper crossing, failure to yield the right-of-way, failure to yield the right-of-way on the wrong side of the road, other improper action on the wrong side of the road, on the wrong side of the road, and other improper action.
Yeah. And that was just the bicyclists. What about the pedestrians? What
up? Okay, so I have pedestrian in the roadway, disobey traffic signals, not visible dark clothing, disobeying traffic signals, improper crossing. In the roadway, disobey traffic signal, improper crossing, disobey traffic signal, and failure to yield the right-of-way in the roadway.
Please. Thank you. Just a comment then. It sounds like we have a path problem, not a speeding problem.
Thank you, Councilor. Councilor O'Doherty?
I was just, and I'm not sure how we do this, because I see a lot of folks that I know a lot about bicycling through town, but when I was the liaison to the Traffic Commission, we were talking about a couple bike boulevards starting there, and then I heard it evolved into, let's just make the whole city 25 miles an hour, which I think would be great if you could just wave a magic wand, but I was wondering if anybody, if it's appropriate, if anybody from the Traffic Commission would want to talk about why the idea of making 7th Street and maybe Garfield limited to local traffic and bicycles. Is that off the table? Is that a good, why was that abandoned? And yeah, I'm interested if it's appropriate.
Sure, if you feel like you want to take that, you'll just need to come up to the mic.
I would like to present my public comments, which address, including funding, many of these issues.
If you come up to the mic. Council, everybody feel okay if we just move to public comment for a minute and then we'll come back for... Okay.
All right. My name is Melanie Arnett. I live in the city of Laramie. And the two best reasons to lower the speed limit to 25, at least on local streets, is that, one, that was the recommendation of the speed study that the city commissioned, and two, 30 miles an hour.
Hey, Councilor Gabriel, can you mute your mic?
And two, 30 miles an hour is an unsafe speed in many parts of Laramie. Another valid and worthy reason to lower the speed limit is that it will facilitate the development of an all ages and abilities active transportation system. In Laramie, most confident and experienced bike commuters that I know choose to ride on local streets in areas where the bike lane on the collector street is not wide enough to keep cyclists out of the dooring zone. The dooring zone is the zone where a cyclist could run into the door of a parked car when the driver opens that door to exit the vehicle. Many cyclists think they should ride where they see bike infrastructure in place. I've surveyed cyclists on Sheridan and 15th Street and asked them why they are biking there. Their answer is that there's a striped lane. I do not ride on these streets because they put me in the dooring zone. Riders that feel confident navigating the dooring zone and bike lanes on higher volume streets at 30 miles an hour are statistically adult males and not representative of our potential ridership. For children and less confident riders who use dangerous bike lanes because they are the only place where bike infrastructure that gets them where they're going, we can do better for these people, Laramie. To create an all ages and abilities active transportation system that is equitable for all users, neighborhood bikeways can be established. The type of neighborhood bikeway best suited to neighborhoods with narrow streets, like we see in many places in Laramie, are low-volume local streets with sharrows. Sharrows are the painted arrows you see on 9th Street on the west side of UW. Sharrows tell drivers that bikes may use the full transportation lane. Sharrows do not belong on streets with a speed limit above 25 miles per hour, per NACTO and other national standards. So that's your reason right there. Thus, in Laramie, safe neighborhood bikeways cannot be established in neighborhoods with narrow streets when the citywide speed limit is 30 miles per hour. The only valid reason city staff recommended against the speed limit to lowering it to the recommended level, in my opinion, is that it is cost prohibitive. On February 24th, a new federal grant cycle opens for the Safer Streets for All grant, and there's so much infrastructure money out there right now for this type of thing based on the infrastructure bill that we should be applying for these things. We are almost certain to qualify for that. It could pay for the traffic study, it could pay for the signs, and we could then be in a place where we could start implementing some neighborhood bikeways that are safe for all ages and abilities. So I want to imagine a bikeway near you. Possible north-south routes in neighborhoods with roads that are too narrow for a safe bike lane include Pierce Street, 5th Street North through Labonte Park, continuing on to 7th Street to Seton Street, 8th Street, 11th Street, and 13th streets. Okay, possible east-west routes in neighborhoods with roads too narrow for a safe bike lane include Harrison Street on the west side, Wyoming Avenue, Ord Street, Park Avenue, Garfield Street, Ivinson Avenue, which is, I think, a local street, Lewis Street, Canby Street, Shield Street, Mitchell Street with a jog at 18th Street, and continuing east on Curtis Street. I want you to imagine your kids riding on a street that feels safe to them. And also with that, I would just like to say that there is a lot of public art on streets that can help fund the paint. You can get sharrows that are MUDTCLBGQ, whatever, that can be artistically designed and developed. They can create a stencil. It can be a competition. It could be a regular thing that we have, so that we also have some interesting calming measures that are Laramie-based. I believe that once I spoke with the ED of the Laramie Public Art Coalition, and she had mentioned having, for example, a pronghorn on a bicycle as a sharrow instead of just the regular bicycle sign. So they could also help pay for the paint and that kind of thing. And that's all.
Thank you. Anyone else? Mr. Stratton, please. Just need your name, of course.
Christopher Stratton.
3 minutes.
My big concern towards this is definitely, I wonder how well it could be controlled. If you switch it down, currently we have people whenever by our house consistently, they're going at least 40 miles an hour. And I don't think that the police department has the capability of actually mandating down to the 20 miles an hour. I would love to see the statistics on how many people are being pulled over that are going 5 to 10 miles over the speed limit that is currently set, because I can guarantee that everybody that's coming from Wyotech to go to their housing after school by our house are going anywhere from 45 to 50 miles an hour in their big trucks. And so I don't think we have the infrastructure in this town to actually make a huge study that's going to cost us whole bunches of money whenever we have drainage issues and other things that are more important that would actually benefit us, so that we're not having flooding yards currently. I think it would be better if we look at our infrastructure and our current amounts of money and spending it in areas that actually mean something to the citizens, rather than the better aspects of biking, etc. I walk all the time. I've biked most of my life. I can do it. I have no problems with it, but I have major problems with my yard flooding because there's not the proper drainage. So that's my statements for the night. Thank you.
Thank you. And just while you're here, thanks for getting us back online earlier so we could hear folks. If you don't know, Chris runs all of our broadcasting. Any other members of the public wishing to speak to the council on this can come forward. Yeah, please come forward. Welcome. Just give us your name and you'll have 3 minutes.
Thank you. My name is Jennifer Beyer. I'm with AARP Wyoming, the Associate State Director for Outreach. Good evening, Honorable Mayor and Laramie City Council members. I'm here to talk to you tonight to advocate for lowering the speed limits in Laramie to 25 miles an hour on most streets. This change aligns with AARP's vision for age-friendly, walkable communities. I think a few of you have seen our walk audit toolkits. We've got a bike audit toolkit. If you have any questions or want to use those, it might save you a little bit of money to bring the public in and have them do some of those assessments on those crosswalks in those areas where you're considering those hotspots. So let me know. Also wanted to let you know our annual challenge grant program is open for city projects, traffic calming measures, murals, fun sidewalks, and paint for crosswalks and things. So those come around every year if you're looking for money for those traffic calming measures. Just wanted to get that out there in case. So Laramie, like many other cities, is evolving. As you grow, you must prioritize the safety and the accessibility of the streets. Lowering speed limits is a proven method of protecting the most vulnerable citizens, the children, the elderly, and those with disabilities. It's not just about preventing accidents, it's about creating a community where everyone feels safe to walk, to bike, and to engage with their neighbors. AARP's efforts in promoting livable communities highlight the importance of walkable streets, which many of you have mentioned tonight. Walkability is not just a convenience, it's a necessary form for many residents who rely on walking and biking as their primary mode of transportation. By slowing down traffic, you encourage people to choose healthier lifestyles and choose more friendly, environmentally friendly modes of transportation. I learned a lot about that from Nancy and her report. So moreover, vibrant street life is the heart of a thriving community. So when you slow the speed limits down, you make the streets a little bit more inviting, you boost local businesses, you foster a sense of community. This isn't just a policy change, it's a step towards a more connected and engaged Laramie. I get the challenges that this might bring. I offer AARP's support, our resources, any sort of expertise we can bring to make these changes effective. We have great policy guides, we've got examples, we've got communities in the age-friendly network, of which Laramie is one of 220, so if you want to talk to another community who's done something similar, we can absolutely connect you. So in conclusion, by considering this proposal, we're not just improving road safety, we're taking a significant step towards creating a more livable, more age-friendly community for all of our citizens. Let's make Laramie a city that prioritizes the well-being of all of its residents. Thank you.
Thank you, and thanks for taking time to be here.
Sure.
Come on forward. We'll just need your name.
Hi, my name is Barbara Hill, and I have a concern. You're telling me that I get that we want to lower the speed limit, and I understand the safety, but when my corner of my street is an ice block, how can anyone be safe if I fall and slip on the corners of the streets because they don't have proper drainage? Does it matter that the car over there is going 25 miles an hour if I'm laying on my back? And my yard is being flooded? I mean, I have a gutter that's on the upper side of the street that's not providing me any service, and it's not helping the people who want to cross my street. We need gutters that are going to drain, and that people can actually cross at these crosswalks. We need those kinds of safeties too. It's nice that everyone wants to ride their bike, everyone wants to walk. I appreciate all those, but I like for those people to cross at the corner and not fall. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll ask you for those comments again when we start talking about stormwater enterprise funds. Come on forward. Just need your name, you'll have 3 minutes.
Hi, my name is Bern Haggerty. I live at 2068 North 16th Street, and I didn't plan this, but following the AARP representative, I'm going to talk about aging in place. I'm a car commuter. Mostly I commute to Cheyenne, so I wind my way through the eastern third of city, past the middle school, on the way out of town and back. I want to support the recommendation of the Transportation Committee. As a car commuter, I think our speed limit should be 20. 20 is plenty. I haven't heard anybody here say that they have some biological or urgent need to move at a speed faster than 20 miles per hour in an automobile, a ton-sized automobile. My wife and I raised a kid here. He got hit by a pizza delivery vehicle on his bicycle. That was one of the unreported accidents that happen all the time. And we're hoping to retire and age in place. I'm going to be that 80-year-old on the geezer tricycle, and maybe I will ride down Grand Avenue. It's not against the law. Is it against the law?
No, sir.
All right. I'm going to be a curmudgeon.
I'll keep an eye out for you.
And what I want the city we chose to live in is Laramie, not Cheyenne. I do not want to age in place in Cheyenne. And I'm having a hard time taking you all seriously and your staff because nobody's talked about this. I work in Cheyenne, I commute there. In the last decade or so, since I've been working there, 4 bicyclists and 2 children in crosswalks have been killed by cars. And Councilman Newman, you asked, what's the consequence of that for you? Well, by my count, 1 traffic citation. That's 6 dead people and 1 traffic citation. To me, what that means is that the City Council of Cheyenne killed 6 people. And that's what you're talking about. How many people are you going to kill when Laramie is the size of the city of Cheyenne? And that's going to be when I'm the tottering octogenarian on my tricycle. All right. So in conclusion, I support your Traffic Commission recommendation. 20 is plenty. I actually, out of this, I sense that you don't make a decision at a work session, but I feel like you owe your constituents a decision about whether you're going to accept the recommendation of your commission or not. So please make a decision. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Haggerty. Any other members of the public wishing to speak to the council on this item? If you're on Zoom, go ahead and just raise your hand. Okay. Council, I'm glad we went to the public comment on that. I think there was some useful information there. City Manager, please.
Mayor, when it's appropriate, I just wanted to follow up on Councilmember O'Doherty's question that sent us off to public comment, if you're acceptable to that. Okay.
This would be the bicycle boulevard.
That is correct.
Pathway conversation.
Yes, that is correct. Thank you. So through you, Mayor, Councilor O'Doherty, you would note on your schedule of meetings that you some time ago had requested a work session on bike boulevards. That's our phrase that's captured there. You'd note that the city clerk at my request had noted that we would take that topic up after this work session. And so I think that you're right to recognize a link between the conversation we're having right now and the potential for some kind of bike boulevard. I'll share just a little bit of history because I can tell that some folks in the room may remember this and some people on council as well. This city staff did actually bring forward a number of recommendations over the years. We explored University and Ivinson, both alternately, as potential bike boulevards in 2009, I think, Eric, did extensive analysis and brought that forward. And it just wasn't the right time for the community to embrace that. We also, I want to say in 2010 or 11, at the suggestions of Mr. Mark Jennings, I think, who many of the people in the room know, we explored Garfield as a potential bike boulevard running potentially from 1st to 30th Street because it runs the entirety of the community. At that time, again, the community just wasn't ready for it. It would require extensive removal of parking along Garfield, and I don't need to tell the council how controversial removing a single parking space can be. So we have data in our archives related to Bike Boulevard. I look forward to resurrecting that conversation, maybe if you guys want to explore it more through the work session that you've requested, Councilor O'Doherty. And then the last, I wanted to say 2 more things if I could, Mayor. Ms. Arnett had brought to my attention an email, the SS4A grant program. We are well aware of that. In June of 2022, myself and our contract grant writer met with YDOT to potentially start the process of applying in the last round for Safe Streets for All federal funding under the new Infrastructure and Inflation Act. What we learned at that time through speaking with WIDA is the city of Laramie was not eligible because we have no fatality history. The focus of the grant, I know.
Gotta die first, huh?
The focus of the grant is to improve fatality statistics. And so in speaking with WIDOT, who is the pass-through agency who will administer these federal funds, we were told we would not qualify. Now, that being said, I want to tell you, since then, we formed a great partnership with the county this spring and applied jointly for a different pot of transportation funding federally that would have city and county benefit. We haven't heard back. But using that paradigm, we are planning with the county to apply for SS4A grant funding. Don't know exactly what that will look like yet, but by applying with the county, we get the green light because, as you saw in Chief Brown's data, the county, by their data, has had 7 fatalities on county roads and state highways outside of the city of Laramie jurisdiction, but within Albany County. So I want to be clear that staff are aware of these grant opportunities, but they are not always as they are sold in the notice of funding opportunity, and we have to do deeper dives sometimes. So with that in mind, we will work with Bailey over at the county. We expect the NOFA on the SS4A to be released next month. What we would be pursuing, though, to be clear, would be planning monies, because you have to have a plan in place in order to be green-lighted to apply for any type of construction funding under these federal programs, which is typical and probably a good use of all of our taxpayer monies. I think that's all I wanted to tell you, but we will queue up that Bike Boulevard conversation for later in the spring. I will say your work session is very full. Your schedule right now, your first opening is May 28th. So if this is a high priority you want to talk about sooner, I would love to know that. We'll try to maybe schedule some extra days. Okay. Thank you, Mayor, for letting me add that data.
Yeah, I sure appreciate that, City Manager. And one thing, when that comes forward, you made the comment about parking, and I just want to be sure that we have a variety of options, because it seems like if cars can go down the street at this number of parking spots, bikes should be able to go down the street at this number of parking spots. So I think we should just have a variety of options from sort of what was laid out as sharrows on these streets to the sort of like more elaborate bike boulevard that might take, and it strikes me because that would be cost prohibitive, right? Like that's the same conversation we're having now, that we can't afford to put signs in. We're not going to be able to rebuild Ivinson Street to make it like kind of a grand bike boulevard, and I just don't want that to be the enemy of doing something good. So a variety would be helpful. Council members, any other comments? Vice Mayor and then Councilor Newman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would like to, first of all, thank the Traffic and Safety Commission for the work you've done on this. I really appreciate it. Second, I'd like to thank the city manager for your clarification and comments, as well as Public Works and Engineering for everything that you provided to this work session. I do support this measure, and my previous comments, I think that reducing the speeds to 25 would be a positive safety measure for our community. But I also think we need to start focusing on pathways for pedestrian and biker usage, that these two really do. From the beginning of the session, I was thinking about our work on bike pathways and pedestrian pathways, and I think they are inextricably connected. So,
thank you, Vice Mayor. Councilor Newman, and then to you, Councilor Richardson.
First off, I want to say that I made 2 statements. I said I didn't support this just by lowering the speed limit. There was other words that I said after that said we need to look at other avenues. I just wanted to make sure that was clear, because I truly believe just lowering the speed limit isn't going to do what we as a council want to achieve with safety. I think we need to look at the pathways. I think we need to look at other avenues. I really like the bike lanes or bike avenues. Is that what we're calling them? Boulevards. And you know, the funny part is, and it's not really funny,
The fact that safety has been brought up. Did you know I don't walk in my own neighborhood? I don't run in my own neighborhood because there are potholes that will break my ankle. So I have to go run other places. So there are other safety measures that as a city, sooner or later, we're going to have to look at. So is this the best for our money? And I want to say we are not Cheyenne. The last time Cheyenne voted on this, they voted to raise their speed limit, not lower it. I'm just saying keeping it how it is, because if we're going under it anyways, why spend the money? So.
Thank you, Councilor. Councilor Richardson, Councilor Pierce. Oh, Micah, we can't hear you again.
Darn it.
No. I'm sure it was going to be so good, too.
But Andy can hear.
Yeah, we can't hear you.
Now we can't hear Andy.
So whatever fixed it last time. I don't know if that was a lot of good hopes from us, but
We must be having
well wishes. Everybody
solar
send those well
flares.
wishes. Right. Okay, I'm going to go to Councilor Pierce and then back to you, Councilor Richardson, after that. See if anything happens to resolve in the meantime by magic.
Yeah, the only thing I'd like to add to some of the previous comments that I made was I really appreciate Ms. Arnett's comment about the design having to avoid being doored. And for those that don't know what that is, that is a big deal. And it can be really horrific for the person who has been doored, right? I mean, it's brain damage, even with a helmet on. It's a big deal. So when we think about that design, we need to think about ways to avoid that in this community. So that's all I'll say.
Thank you, Councilor Pierce. Councilor Richardson, you want to give it a shot? I'm guessing that means it's not working.
Calm down.
If you want to email me or text me your comment or question, I'm happy to read it, but otherwise I'll just come back to you in a minute. Any other council members have anything to say here? I think my take on this is, I think chasing the hot spots is maybe a little bit of a red herring on this, because if you look at the sort of the metrics on it, it's one accident, 2 accidents. It makes, it starts to turn yellow with 2. There's just not enough data to make for this to be, I think, sort of like worth us basing what's going to be the next several years of planning on. And I think what we should do is probably, we're all folks that live here and spend a lot of time paying attention to things, and we have a community and a traffic commission that does the same. I think we know, right? Like the speed limit is lower around the university for a very specific reason, right? There's a lot of pedestrians and bicyclists. We know those people are also going to go into the Tree neighborhood. They're going to go north of campus. And we could start building this plan with this in mind and start making changes, whether those be traffic calming of some variety, whether they be bike boulevards, lowering speed limits. Like we can sort of geofence some of this stuff to Tree neighborhood, to McHugh, as Councilor Somerville brought it up, but it's sort of an outlier. It's there's not much by way of any sort of like vehicle, pedestrian, vehicle, bicyclist accident, but I don't think that's because, I think that's because there's not a lot of people walking or biking in West Laramie. I don't think it's the other way around. And so, I would hate for us to not do anything here. I think the recommendation, I still support the recommendation from the Traffic Commission. I still think, it is bared out in the past. But I think what we need to start having conversations about is what are our streets and roads going to be used for, and what's the difference to us, right? Like, Sheridan Street is going to move cars. Okay, if Sheridan Street is going to move cars, then we don't need to be investing in bike lanes on Sheridan Street. We need to be thinking about what streets are going to be used for pedestrians and how we can invest there. Because I think for us to just sort of like do these all on the same streets because bikes and cars will all move together. It just doesn't work. Yesterday I saw a gentleman riding his bike down the middle of Grand Avenue. It wasn't you, Mr. Haggerty, but I did see somebody riding down the street, and I thought that poor person, yeah, probably Councilor Gabriel. But I thought, like, there's cars stopped at a stop sign or at a stoplight on 13th, and he was headed east, and I thought those cars are about to catch him, and there's both lanes, so traffic's going to get backed up. Those motorists are going to get angry. Somebody's going to pass abruptly, and that's how you die, right? Like, almost certainly he turned onto 14th or 15th and was fine, right? But it takes, all of a sudden we have a red spot on our map that we're chasing, right? And so I just think maybe steering off of these hot spots that are on our presentation, maybe not the best way. I think we should focus on neighborhoods that we know are going to be more likely to be used for multimodal transportation. Start there, and I do think this investment in trail systems, or pathways rather, I think that's sort of immediate. I think that's something we should be working on right away, because some of the solutions are just paint, just letting motorists know there's going to be a lot of bikes on this street. We're all going to feel safer riding our bikes there. So, I think the other piece that I'm really struggling with is we're stuck in this spot of not doing anything now. We're going to have a conversation about bike boulevards, but those are, as we heard, necessitated by speed limit being 25, right? So now we're in this spot of like, which comes first? We're what feels like deciding not to reduce our speed limits to 25, but then we're saying like, do this other thing that will necessitate a 25 mile an hour speed limit. And so like, I just don't know what we're doing. I don't have a solution to that. I mean, I think the bike boulevards make a lot of sense, but I don't think it maybe makes any sense for us to have one without the other. So I continue to support this speed limit change. I certainly appreciate the Traffic Commission's efforts and the staff's efforts as well. I don't really love the solutions that we have here. The bike boulevards I think will be strong, but I'm not sure it's as clean as we all hope it would be. And then just by way of Councilor Richardson's note, Councilor Richardson, you want to try one more time before I butcher what you were going to say? Nope. All right. Buckle in.
Mayor?
Yeah, please.
If I could try to unmute my computer and mute Chambers and see if maybe
Let's see what happens.
Councilor Somerville said that they can hear us and each other, but we're not hearing them.
Okay, we're going to try something. Everybody hang on. Councilor Richardson, you want to give that a shot? Seems to.
Can you hear me now?
Yes. Good job, City
No?
Clerk.
Yes?
Yes. She may not be able to hear us now.
I can't hear you guys now.
We have to keep Chambers muted.
Okay, so I can go ahead. And I don't mean to kind of open up a new bag of worms or a bag of worms, but, as we were listening to public comment, it was brought up that the 2014 study recommended 25 miles per hour. I am just kind of stuck on this idea of why we need a new traffic study. If Laramie has grown, if our roads have changed and increased and all that good stuff, then is there any reason to believe that it wouldn't show 25 again? Is there any reason that a new study would say, oh, actually, keep them at 30? I'm just kind of hung up on this point that could save us so much money if we could just utilize that 2014 study.
And City Clerk, do you want to shift us back to the other so that they can hear us then? All right, Councilor Richardson, if you have a follow-up, it's going to take just a minute, but can you hear us now? Okay. City engineer, city manager, anybody have a thought on that?
Mayor, I'll let the engineer address the shelf life of the data. I think it is fair to say, though, there have been notable changes since 10 years ago. So I don't know. We can look into it further, I guess. I won't say no, but I have to rely on the expertise of my engineering staff. Maybe there's pieces and parts that make sense that we could recycle. I don't know. It's a tough call. I get the question, Councilor Richardson. It's a question that I asked as well of the staff. But if we're going to make a change to speed limit, having current data is going to be really important to defend it. I think city attorney will tell you Cheyenne's under litigation right now. Well, not now. I think they rectified it over changing a speed limit without the speed study data required under statute. So I think we need to look into it a little more. Councilor Richardson.
Is that sufficient, city engineer? Anything you want to add?
Honorable Mayor, I think our city manager hit a lot of it. I will note too that we have had some discussions with YDOT, and they actually recommended going out and doing a new study since that study was so dated as well.
Are you meaning anyway, or if we are interested in changing?
If we're interested in changing, to do a new study.
Okay, thank you. Councilor Pierce, Councilor Doherty?
Yeah, if I could just add, maybe eligibility for some of that federal money, that pass-through money, may require a new study. I don't know, but that would certainly be worth checking into as well, because maybe it needs to be within so many years.
Thank you, Councilor. Councilor Doherty, please.
I want to point out there have been changes. There's more streets, there's more people, and there's much blunter car. The fronts of cars, even sedans now, are blunt and increasing fatalities with pedestrians. So if anything, if 25 was appropriate before we had more people, and these really, everything is like a bulldozer in the front, it seems to me that, yeah, like if it was appropriate then, it should be appropriate now. I mean, I understand some Jeep, no, it's every vehicle just about now that you can't see children in front of you unless they're pretty far out. So it seems like it would make it more conservative, given the changes that have happened. Thanks.
Thank you, Councilor Doherty. Any other council members? Councilor Shumway, please.
Well, I'll make a brief comment. When I first moved to Laramie, I lived on a street with dirt roads and lots of potholes, and I thought, this is great, they're not going to run over my kids. But what I'd like to see is for us to come up with something to where we can identify safe neighborhoods to where people can walk, bicycle, and do whatever, and say, you don't have to move to a place with dirt roads and potholes to be safe. We're going to find a way through either art or narrowing the streets or calming somehow, so where a family can say, I want to live in this part of Laramie because it's a safe place for my kids to ride their bicycles, for me to have my grandparents on their Haggerty's, three-wheel bicycle or whatever, where they can feel safe without having to change the location of where they live in Laramie. I'd like to see Laramie go on a study to where we can say now we have made all of our transportation safe in the city of Laramie.
Thank you, Councilor Shumway. I think that's a great goal for us to have. Absolutely. One of the curiosities, and I apologize for coming back to similar to Councilor Richardson, that the plan, but I think it's a meaningful point. I mean, almost entirely the reason for people being wary on this council is cost, right? So I think when you look at this and you think $500,000, that $500,000 is the plan, and there are parts of our town that have changed, sure. Notably so. There are also parts of our town that really haven't changed much, right? Like south of the university in the Tree neighborhood, largely the same. And to Councilor Doherty's point, if it's changed at all, it's gotten less safe for pedestrians, I think. So I think that there is some data that we can use in that study to warrant some sort of change. And this idea that it's sort of a 3 to 5 year shelf life, like we can't finish any of this in 3 to 5 years, right? So even if we decided, even if this was a regular meeting and the council just decided we're changing the speed limit, it's going to be a couple years before the speed limit changes, right? Like we're going to have all of these signs put in, all of it engineered, all of that has to change first. And so I just wonder how we would get anything done with a shelf life on a plan like that unless we're willing to sort of like part and parcel the plan for what makes sense. And I don't mean to downplay, there are parts of this, I certainly wouldn't want to touch Harney Street, wouldn't want to touch Snowy Range without a new plan entirely, because those streets have changed dramatically. Places, the new Slade Elementary, that part of town, significant changes. The high school is, new in that time frame. There's entirely new neighborhoods since then, right? But there's a lot of it that has remained quite the same. So maybe we can find a way to be a little more flexible on that. Any other comments, council, before we close out this work session? Okay. We have already gone to public comments, so I'm going to go ahead and close public comment, or close out this work session, rather. Thank you all for your attendance and your comments. Staff, thank you for your efforts on this. Obviously, this will not be the last of these conversations. We're going to move on to council updates and council comments. Councilor Somerville it just disappeared right as we'd said that, and I realized this is going to be a problem. So I'm going to come to Zoom folks at the end. Councilor O'Doherty.
I want to go back to the Laramie Advisory Commission on Disabilities, who discussed perhaps doing the walk surveys like the AARP did in Cheyenne. So our Advisory Commission is interested in that, and maybe as a way to ground truth our data that's collected from our street survey. So I would love to talk to Jennifer more about that, and I hope that we'd all be on board with having some citizen participation to assess these pathways. Thanks.
Thank you, Councilor. Councilor Shumway, anything from you?
Thank you, Your Honor. Two things. You got to hear from the Traffic Safety Commission tonight, so I won't go over that anymore. We, the Laramie Youth Council met, and we had a tour of Interfaith this coming Thursday, first Thursday in February. We're going to do the Laramie Soup Kitchen because of one of their goals is on food insecurities. But that's the only thing I have to report is those two committees that I've met with.
Thank you, Councilor. Councilor Pierce?
Nothing from me, thank you.
Pilot Hill met. They are working through the process of their trailhead and said it has been going great working with our staff through the process of sort of navigating some of those variances that are required. So they were appreciative. Some of those were affected by the changes the council made, so I wanted to be sure that was passed along. A new trail is open if you all get a sort of like a lunchtime minute to go for a walk just south of the Willett Trailhead. There's a new universally accessible trail that is sort of like crushed, packed granite. I would encourage you all to go check that out. It opened a couple weeks ago. They plan to have another busy year building trails this summer. Okay. Vice Mayor?
Thank you. The restructuring of the Town and Gown group has begun, and I attended the first seminar where we are beginning the process of international certification of our Town and Gown in Laramie. And that was Wednesday, January 17. And the first session was on the history of towns and gowns going back to the Middle Ages, actually, and up to today. And the next session will be on forming a group, the strategic process of forming a community group. And that is Wednesday, tomorrow, the 24th, from 11 to 1, and it'll be held in the Albany County Commissioners Meeting Room. There was an excellent representation from throughout the city, WyoTech, LCCC, the university, law enforcement, city staff. It was a really good, broad representation, so it was a positive experience. The second meeting, Thursday, the 18th, the Vulnerable Adults Work Group that Councilor O'Doherty and I have been working with, we continue to focus on rentals and looking at we continue to explore housing rental practice and landlord-tenant relations. The coalition, people are working within the coalition to expand that to broader representation. So it started with a vulnerable adults group, then the healthy aging, Health and Human Services, AARP, Alzheimer's Association, our state legislators, WYO Legal Aid, UW Extension Services, et cetera. And the next step is reaching out to the rental and real estate community to get representation at the table. And we also potentially have a housing loan officer who's very interested in affordable housing and would like to join the group, so we're working with that. Carly Provenza has completed her housing survey and will be working on data analysis. And the other exciting thing that's come out of this group is that UW Extension Services, Maya Gilmore, has written and now published a tenant resources on the UW Ag site. And it is worth looking at. And so you could go to UW AG News, UWAgnews.com. Tenant resources. But if you go to the university and do tenant resources, you can find this resource piece that she's put together, and I would suggest reviewing that and coming back with any suggestions. And there was a request whether we might want to post this on the city website so that it is available, and she was very amenable to our doing that. And then the last meeting yesterday, Planning Commission, and they had 2 work sessions, and one was on the stormwater drainage focus group that is going on. Commissioner Mattermore is representing the Planning Commission at those meetings, though other members may attend. He was voted to be the spokesperson and representative for the Planning Commission. The Planning Commission did go on to have quite a robust discussion that I cannot convey here regarding stormwater drainage. And one of the primary concerns that came out of that was that as we move toward looking at the monies and allocation of monies, that we make sure we've got a very clear plan in place. And they kept coming back to that and back to that. That if we're looking at a possible $135 million, that our plan better be really good. The second piece was, and I think this is important for us to know, planning has 2 interns who will be working with individuals on the west side to get their ideas about what they want and things like that. They did a nice presentation, and they have shared that with me, and I will have Nancy distribute to everybody so you can look at that. But I spoke and thought that it would be very important that they connect with the work going on from the Historic Preservation Society so that the community does not get an idea that the left hand doesn't know what the right hand is doing, but that we're working in consortium to try and get a sense of what the West Side wants and how they want to proceed, rather than go in like they're doing this totally separately, that they acknowledge that these other focus groups are going on. But I think this could be very helpful for us, and this is their graduate project. And so I think they have some exciting approaches to that. And that's it for me.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. Councilor Newman?
No update, Your Honor.
Okay, Councilor Richardson does not have any. Councilor Gabriel, what are the chances we can hear you? Any updates?
Mayor, I feel somewhat adequate after the vice mayor's report, but I have no city updates.
Don't we all? Thank you, Councilor. All right. So as far as I can tell, we have no agenda review tonight because we don't have a meeting next week, 5th Tuesday. So council members, we're adjourned. Thank you, everybody.